San Isidro was a town made of dust and ambition, and it was hard to say which was thicker. The dust was red, ancient, stirred by the winds that swept down from the mesas, coating the new sawn pine of the general store and the canvas tops of the freight wagons. The ambition was newer, arriving with the clang of steel on steel, on the two parallel lines of the railroad that had just nosed their way into the New Mexico territory, aiming for Arizona and the ocean beyond. It was late in the 1870s, a time when the law was often just the opinion of the loudest man with a repeating rifle. Here, in the plaza, the dust and the ambition were having a contest. Clara Whitfield stood where the shade of the land office offered a little relief from the 3 o'clock sun. She had been in San Isidro for 2 weeks, and her skin still felt raw from the dry heat, her throat tight with the fine powder that hung in the air. She had come from Kansas seeking not adventure, but its opposite. She had come seeking a place so quiet and unremarkable that the shadows from her past could not find her. She had come to find a patch of earth where she could build a small schoolhouse, teach reading and sums, and be left alone. San Isidro, it seemed, was not that place. In the center of the plaza, where farmers usually sold their meager crops of corn and squash, stood a heavy iron cage. It was meant for transporting bears or perhaps unruly felons, and it sat baking in the sun. Inside it, a man was standing. He was Dine, a Navajo. He stood straight, not gripping the bars, his hands cuffed behind him. He wore a simple cotton shirt and denim trousers, worn but clean. His black hair was tied back in the traditional way, and he was a man of perhaps 30 years. His face a map of high cheekbones and a strong jaw. His expression unreadable. He seemed to be listening to something far beyond the noise of the crowd. The crowd was the source of the noise. 50 or 60 men. A few women clutching shawls despite the heat. All pressed in, their faces turned ugly. "Stole 'em, blind," shouted a man in a dusty bowler hat. "Took every last head from the Double R." "Lynch him," another voice roared. "This one thick with whiskey from the saloon. What are we waiting for, Pike? Get him out of there." Sheriff Pike stood near the cage, a heavy man sweating in his wool vest. He held his hands up, palms out, a gesture that was half calming, half pleading. "Now hold on, just hold on. We have procedures." "He gets a hearing." A hearing, the bowler hat man spat. "He is a raider. We all know what his kind does. We found the tracks, did we not?" "You found tracks," Sheriff Pike said, his voice straining. "We are still determining facts." Clara watched, her stomach turning. This was not procedure. This was a prelude. She had seen this kind of heat in men's eyes before, back in Kansas. It was the heat of certainty, a terrible fire that burned away doubt and demanded a sacrifice. It was the same fire that had consumed her husband, Robert, who had been a teacher, like her, who had written a letter to the newspaper questioning the land grants given to a powerful cattle baron, who had then been found dead on a hunting trip, a single bullet in his back. The entire affair ruled a tragic accident by a judge who played cards with that same baron every Thursday night. Clara had packed one trunk, sold the small house for pennies, and bought a one-way ticket west, as far as the money would take her. She had fled that kind of power, the kind that smiled at you, called you ma'am, and crushed you without a second thought. And here it was again, in a dusty plaza in the middle of nowhere. The power in San Isidro had a name, Lucius Harrow. He was the railroad baron, the man who had laid those gleaming tracks through rock and desert. He was not here, not in the dust with the common folk. He was likely in his private rail car, sipping brandy and reading a telegraph. But his presence was felt. It was Harrow's railroad that needed the land. It was Harrow's surveyors who were pushing into Din and Pueblo territory. And the Double R, the ranch that had reportedly been raided, was owned by a subsidiary of Harrow's own company. Sheriff Pike, for all his bluster, was a man leaning on a hollow stick. He kept the peace, but the peace was defined by Lucius Harrow. Clara's goal had been simple: Find a small adobe building, put up a sign for a school, and teach the children of the ranchers, the merchants, perhaps even the Mexican and Pueblo children, if their parents would allow it. She believed in books, in the quiet power of words to build bridges. She wanted to make a small, good thing in a world that had shown her its capacity for large, terrible things. Now, she felt that small hope drying up like a puddle in the sun. This town was not looking for bridges. It was looking for a rope. The man in the cage turned his head, just slightly. His gaze swept over the crowd, not with fear, but with a slow, appraising calm. He was a blacksmith, she had heard someone say. Atsa Yazi. He worked at a small forge on the edge of town, living between the world of the reservation and the world of the white settlers. He was known to be quiet, a man of few words, a skilled guide who knew the high desert better than any man alive. He was also a survivor of the Long Walk, the forced relocation of his people years ago, a scar he carried not on his skin, but deep inside. Clara did not know this as fact, but she felt it. She recognized the stillness of a person who has endured the unimaginable and come out the other side. Quieter, harder, and entirely himself. The crowd surged. A man throwing a clod of dirt that struck the iron bars near the man's head. He did not flinch. He just closed his eyes for a moment, his breath a slow, steady rhythm. And then he opened them, and his eyes found hers. It was not a moment from a dime novel. There was no sudden swell of music, no divine spark of recognition. It was something more raw and far more unsettling. Clara was standing apart from the crowd, her face pale, her hands gripping her reticule so tightly her knuckles were white. She was not shouting. She was not jeering. She was just watching, and her eyes were not filled with the hate and fear of the others. They were filled with a terrible, aching sorrow, a sorrow he knew. Atsa Yazi looked at Clara Whitfield. He saw a white woman. Yes, he saw the dark, practical dress of a widow, the sign of a different kind of loss. But he saw, for the first time that day, a human being looking at him. Not at the animal the crowd had decided he was. He saw her dignity, and in that moment, she was the only one in the entire plaza who was granting him his. Clara could not look away. The noise of the mob faded to a dull roar, like the sea. She saw the man, Atsa Yazi, trapped in that cage of new iron, brought west on those new rails. The cage was prejudice. The cage was the greed of men like Harrow, the lazy hatred of the men in the crowd, the fearful silence of men like Pike. She knew that cage. She had been living in a different version of it ever since Robert died. A cage of fear, of grief, of helplessness. She saw him, and he saw her, a man who had lost his land, and a woman who had lost her anchor. Two people set adrift by the same careless tide of power. Sheriff Pike pulled a large key from his pocket and tapped the lock on the cage. "This man is in my custody," he announced, his voice suddenly trying for authority. "He will be held until the circuit judge arrives in 3 days. Now disperse. Go on. All of you." The crowd grumbled, but the immediate threat of a lynching seemed to pass, melting back into muttered promises of what would happen if the judge did not see things their way. Men drifted back toward the saloon. The man in the bowler hat glared at the cage one last time and then stalked off toward the telegraph office, likely to send a message to someone who mattered more than the sheriff. Clara remained, rooted to the spot. The plaza was emptying, the dust settling. The sun was beginning its long, slow drop toward the western rim of the desert, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. The railroad tracks, just visible at the end of the main street, gleamed in the last light. They were a promise of progress, of civilization, but Clara saw them for what they were. 2 strips of iron that carried both goods and destruction. A force that could build a town or tear a culture apart, all with the same cold indifference. She looked back at the cage. Atsa Yazi had not moved. He was facing west, watching the sunset through the bars, his face calm. He was a blacksmith, she thought, a maker, and they had put him in a cage. Her quest for a quiet life, for a small, peaceful schoolhouse, suddenly seemed like a child's fantasy. There was no quiet corner in a world this loud, no peace in a land this contested. There was only the dust, and the ambition, and the iron, and the terrible, familiar weight of injustice, settling over San Isidro like the coming night. Clara Whitfield pulled her shawl tighter. She had not come here to fight. She had come here to heal. But as she looked at the silent man in the iron cage, she felt the first, unwelcome flicker of a fire she thought had died in Kansas. It was not hope. It was something harder. It was resolve. The dust of the plaza did not settle in the sheriff's office. It coated the stacked papers on the desk, dulled the glass of the rifle cabinet, and made the air taste of grit. Clara Whitfield had followed Sheriff Pike inside, her footsteps silent on the worn floorboards. The office was small, hot, and smelled of stale tobacco and anxious sweat. Pike slumped into his chair behind the desk, the wood groaning in protest. He tossed his hat onto a pile of wanted posters and ran a hand over his wet, graying hair. He looked like a man who had lost a fight before it began. "You cannot just leave him in that cage." "Sheriff," Clara said. Her voice was low, but it cut through the heavy air. Pike winced, not looking at her. "Ma'am, he is in my jail, which is the cage. We do not have a proper cell, and it is safer for him in there than out here. You saw them. They want a rope. A circuit judge comes in 3 days. That is the best I can do." 3 days, Clara repeated, the words tasting like ash. "He will not last 3 days. You know that. What evidence? Sheriff, what actual proof do you have against Atsuyazi?" Pike finally looked up, his eyes weary and irritated. "Ma'am, with respect, this is not your concern. We found tracks. We found a dead steer with a Navajo arrow in it, miles from the raid. It is enough." An arrow. Clara felt a cold, sharp anger, the kind she recognized from Kansas. "1 arrow. You are holding a man for hanging on the basis of 1 arrow and some tracks, Sheriff. I was a school teacher. I know when a lesson is poorly prepared. This is a poorly prepared lie." Pike slammed his heavy fist on the desk, raising a cloud of red dust. "It is not a lie. It is what we have, and it is not your concern." The raid happened on the south range of the Double R. Clara pressed on, her mind working quickly, pulling the threads of gossip and observation together, which is exactly where Mr. Harrow's new railroad survey needs to cut through. Is it not convenient that the ranchers who graze there are suddenly made to look like thieves? Pike's face went pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. "You had best watch your mouth. Mrs. Whitfield, you are new here. You do not understand how things work. You are making accusations against Mr. Harrow." "I am asking questions about a man in a cage," she said evenly. "If the mob is the problem, then release him. To me." The sheriff stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "Release him to you, that is not possible. He is a prisoner." "I will stand as his civil surety," Clara said, the words coming out before she had fully considered their weight. It was an old legal term, one her father, a lawyer, had used. "I will post a bond, guaranteeing his appearance for the circuit judge. You get to wash your hands of the mob, and he gets to live until his trial." Pike leaned back, a humorless smirk twisting his lips. He looked around the shabby office, then at her simple, worn black dress. Surety. And what bond would a traveling schoolteacher post? "Ma'am, your books. You need money for surety. A lot of money. More than you have. I would wager." For a moment, Clara felt the wind go out of her. He was right. She had almost nothing. Just the small sum from the sale of her house. Enough to last 6 months, perhaps a year if she was frugal, and... She opened her reticule, her hands steady, though her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle of paper currency. It was all of it. $230. She placed it on the desk. Pike looked at the money, his eyebrows rising. That is a fair sum, ma'am, but it is not enough to cover the loss of an entire cattle herd. Not nearly. Clara took a breath. She had known this moment would come. Her hand went to her left ring finger. The simple gold band was thin from years of wear. Robert had placed it there. It was the last piece of him she owned. It was the symbol of her old life, of her grief, of her failure to save him. Her fingers trembled as she twisted it. It stuck on the knuckle. She pulled harder, wincing as the skin broke. The ring came free. She placed the small gold circle on top of the paper money. "And this," she whispered, "it is all I have, my entire worth. Will that be enough to guarantee one man's life for 3 days?" There was a long, terrible silence in the office. There was only the sound of a fly buzzing against the hot glass and the ticking of a large clock on the wall. Sheriff Pike stared at the ring. The smirk was gone. He looked profoundly tired, and for the first time, ashamed. "Clara Whitfield," he said, his voice rough. "You are a fool." "Am I?" she asked. Before Pike could answer, the door of the office swung open, letting in a shaft of bright, dusty light. 2 people stood there. The first was Father O'Rourke, the parish priest, a man with a wild halo of white hair and the clear, kind eyes of a man who had seen too much sin to be surprised by any of it. Behind him stood Marchetta, the proprietor of the cantina, a woman whose face was lined with wisdom and who missed nothing in San Isidro. "Sheriff," Father O'Rourke said, his voice booming in the small space, "I heard raised voices. I came to see if prayers were needed, or perhaps common sense." Marchetta looked past him, her dark eyes landing on the money and the small gold ring on the desk. She looked at Clara's pale, determined face, and then at Pike's red, conflicted one. "Madre de Dios," Marchetta breathed. "She is serious." "It is a sin," Father O'Rourke said, stepping inside, "to let a mob rule. Pike, it is a sin against God and against the law you swore to uphold. This woman, a stranger, is offering what you will not simple decency. A trial. Give the man a trial." "He will get a trial," Pike snapped, rising from his chair. "I am just trying to keep him alive until then." "Then you must accept her offer," Marchetta said, her voice quiet but steel. "Let her take him. Get him out of the plaza. It diffuses the bomb. Or are you waiting for it to explode?" The air in the office was so thick. Clara felt she might suffocate. Pike was cornered by his own fear, by their logic, and by the tiny gold ring. And then the light in the doorway was blocked again. The man who entered was not like the others. He was tall, dressed in a tailored Eastern suit of dark gray wool that should have been unbearable in the Arizona heat. He was clean-shaven, his silver hair immaculate. He smelled faintly of expensive cigars and lemon water. It was Lucius Harrow. He smiled, a polished, easy smile that did not reach his cold, pale blue eyes. "Sheriff Pike," he said, his voice as smooth as oiled steel. "A complication, I hear." He nodded politely to Clara. "Mrs. Whitfield, I heard of your arrival. A school teacher. Such a noble calling. We need civilization in this wild place." His gaze drifted to the desk. Settling on the ring and the money, his smile widened. "Just a fraction." "And what a civilized gesture," he said. "Your compassion is admirable. Truly. But perhaps," he added, his tone hardening just slightly, "it is misplaced." He turned to Pike. "All business, Sheriff. The people are upset. My property has been stolen. My men are demanding justice. Order must be kept. This spectacle is bad for stability, bad for progress. I am handling it, Mr. Harrow," Pike said, sweating freely now. "Are you?" Harrow asked, his voice soft. He looked back at Clara. "Mrs. Whitfield." This is a harsh land. It does not reward sentiment. Be careful you do not spend your compassion where it will not be returned. Good day." He gave a final, crisp nod and was gone, leaving a vacuum in the room and the faint scent of his cigar. The threat hung in the air, unspoken, perfectly clear. Order must be kept. His order. Pike looked at the door where Harrow had been, then at the ring. He sighed. A long, ragged sound of defeat. He picked up the ring. "It is not enough, but it is all you have, and it is more than I have." He turned to a small stack of papers. "I will write up the bond, but you must know, if he runs, you lose this, all of it, and if he stays, and the judge finds him guilty, I cannot protect him, or you." "I understand," Clara said. "No," Pike said, dipping his pen in the inkwell. "You do not, but you will." As Pike scratched the pen across the paper, Clara's mind raced. She had not had time to check her mail. She had come straight from the plaza, but now, with Harrow's appearance, she knew she had to be right. This was a frame. The postmaster, Mr. Gantry, hurried in, holding a small canvas pouch. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Thank goodness. This came on the afternoon wire, and then the wagon. Your name is on it. Forwarded from Kansas." He handed her the pouch. She fumbled with the string, her hands still shaking. Inside were letters and a thick, rolled packet of her old teaching primers. Tucked within the packet, however, was a rolled-up drawing. She unfurled it slightly. It was a survey map, marked with grease pencil, showing a rail line cutting directly through the R's south range. And at the bottom of the pouch, a single, folded piece of cheap paper. It was not addressed. It was not signed. She opened it. The handwriting was rough, barely literate, but the message was clear. "They will plant the evidence at his camp tonight. The R brand, watch Rook." Clara's blood ran cold. Rook, Cass Rook, Harrow's right-hand man, a hired gun with a reputation for solving problems. She looked up. Pike was still writing. Father O'Rourke and Marchetta were watching her. She folded the note and tucked it deep into her reticule, along with the map. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the resolve was stronger. It was not just instinct anymore. It was fact. "Here," Pike said, sliding the paper toward her. "Sign here." Clara took the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed Clara Whitfield. She pushed the money in the ring across the desk. The bargain was made. Pike took the large iron key from its hook. Father O'Rourke, and Marchetta went to the door, leaving Clara alone for a moment. She leaned against the desk, the world tilting slightly. She had just traded her entire past and her only future for a man she did not know, on the word of an anonymous note. She heard the heavy scrape of the cage door, the murmur of the crowd. Atsa Yazi walked into the office. He was not wearing the cuffs. He stood tall, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on her. He looked at the desk, saw the scattered papers, saw her pale face. He understood the transaction. "My belongings," he said to Pike. His voice was low, raspier than she expected, but clear. Pike pointed to a small bundle on a shelf. Atsa picked it up. It was not much. A bedroll, a canteen, and a leather sheath holding a knife. He tucked the sheath into his belt. He turned and looked at Clara. He did not say thank you. He just held her gaze. And again, she felt that strange, stark recognition. He was judging her, weighing her, as she had been weighed by Harrow. "Let us go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. They walked out into the falling dusk. The plaza was quieter, but men watched from the shadows of the saloon porch, their faces hard. Clara felt their eyes on her back, a physical, burning weight. They reached the edge of town, where the last adobe building gave way to open desert scrub. 3 men, smelling of cheap whiskey and sweat, stumbled out of the alley between the saloon and the livery. "Well, look here," one of them slurred. He was a big man, a freight hauler she had seen. Pike let the savage go. The second man, smaller and meaner, saw Clara, and he is with the widow. "Where you going, sweetheart? He ain't safe company for a white woman." The small man lunged, grabbing for Clara's arm. Clara cried out and stumbled back. Atsa did not raise his voice. He did not raise his hand. He simply moved, stepping between her and the man with a speed that was startling. He was just there, a wall of quiet, solid presence. "Get out of the way, Injun," the big man growled, pushing at Atsa's shoulder. Atsa did not budge. The man pushed again, harder, and in that instant, Atsa let out a whistle. It was not loud, but it was sharp, a piercing single note that cut the air like a blade. The horses tied to the saloon rail, already nervous from the men's shouting, tossed their heads. One, a big bay, reared, pulling its reins free from the hitching post with a crack of wood. It clattered into the dusty street, eyes rolling, scattering the three drunks like bowling pins. "My horse," the big man yelled, scrambling after it. In the second of pure chaos, Atsa's hand was on Clara's elbow. His grip was firm, not violent. "Walk," he commanded, his voice low. "Do not run." He guided her past the confusion, his pace measured, his body shielding hers from the street. They did not look back. They walked into the growing darkness of the desert. When the sounds of the town were a faint murmur behind them, he stopped. The desert night was cooling fast, and the first stars were appearing. A coyote yelped, far off. Clara was shaking, a delayed reaction to the drunks, to the ring, to the choice she had made. Atsa Yazi faced her. In the faint light, she could see his face was grim. He had saved her, but it was his presence that had put her in danger. He reached to his belt and drew the knife from its sheath. Clara flinched, a small, involuntary movement. He stopped, his hand freezing. He held the knife out to her. "Handle first." "You should not be unarmed," he said. She stared at the knife. It was not a weapon of war, it was a tool. The blade was dark, fire-blackened, but the edge looked razor-sharp. The handle was simple, wrapped tightly in worn, dark leather. It was perfectly balanced. "I cannot," she whispered. "It is a tool," he said, as if sensing her thought. "To cut rope, for food. It was the first good one I made." He pushed it gently toward her. His message was clear. She had bought his life. He was offering her a way to protect her own. It was a new, different kind of transaction. Clara reached out and took the knife. The handle was warm from his body, the weight of it solid and real in her hand. It was the first real thing she had felt all day, more real than the fear, more real even than the memory of her ring. She held the knife. He held her gaze. "We must be off this road before the moon is high," Atsa Yazi said. He turned and began to walk, his form a dark shadow against the twilight, moving toward the dark mesas. After a moment, Clara secured the knife in a reticule and followed him into the unknown. They walked for nearly an hour, moving away from the faint glow of San Isidro into the deep, breathing silence of the high desert. Clara's town shoes, thin-soled and meant for wooden boardwalks, were a poor match for the rocky, uneven ground. She stumbled. The knife Atsa had given her a heavy, alien weight in her reticule. He walked ahead of her, not quickly, but with a ground-eating, relentless pace that she struggled to match. He did not seem to walk on the land so much as with it, his feet finding purchase where she could only find loose shale and sharp-edged yucca. He did not look back. He did not offer a hand. He simply existed, a dark, straight-backed silhouette against the star-pricked cloth of the sky. Clara felt a flicker of resentment, quickly replaced by a cold dose of reality. He was not her guide. He was a man she had bought, and they were fugitives. He owed her nothing, least of all courtesy. He finally stopped in the shelter of a shallow arroyo, a dry riverbed carved into the earth. He knelt, his hand touching the ground, then gestured for her to be quiet. "This is what you bought," he said, his voice low. He led her another 20 yards down the arroyo. The smell hit her first, the coppery, sick, sweet smell of death. And then she saw it, a dead steer, lying on its side, bloated in the cool night. "This is one of them," he said, "from the raid." Clara covered her nose and mouth with her hand. "How do you know where is the arrow? The one the sheriff spoke of." "That arrow was for the sheriff," Atsa said, his voice flat. He walked to the animal's flank. He took his own knife from his belt and used the tip to point. Look. In the pale moonlight, she could see the hide. It was a mess of seared flesh, but there were 2 marks. One, an older, scarred mark, the double R of Harrow's ranch. The other was a fresh, weeping burn, a crude circle with a cross inside it, laid directly on top of the first. "The brand," she whispered. "This is not the mark of my people," Atsa said. "It is not the mark of the Pueblo, or the Apache. It is the mark of no one. It is a lie, made to look like an Indian sign." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night. The note, "Watch Rook." This was what it meant. He was not just a killer. He was a stage setter, as her father would have called him. "They will say your people did this," she said. "They already are," he replied. He had moved away from the carcass and was kneeling by a small, blackened circle of rocks a few feet away. A fire pit. "They say we are careless, that we are savages, but the men who did this, they were the careless ones." He scooped something from the ashes. He held it out on his palm for her to see. "What is it?" she asked. "It is not from here," he said. "This is not mesquite, not juniper." He crumbled the black fragments, and they left a greasy, dark stain on his hand. "This is coal, from the east, the kind they burn in the new engines." He pointed to a black, sticky smear on one of the rocks. "And this, tar, to seal the ties. It comes from the railroad camp. They brought the railroad's fire to do this work." Clara stared at his hand. The proof. The link. It was not just a frame. It was a frame built with Lucius Harrow's own tools. "We have to take this. We have to show Sheriff Pike. The judge." Atsa brushed the coal from his hands, his expression unchanging. "Pike is a man who builds his house where the wind tells him. He will not see this. And the judge, he is a white man, coming to a white town, to hear a white man's complaint. This," he gestured to the coal, "is just dirt to him. We need more. We need the cattle, the live ones." He stood and looked up at the sky. He was scanning the stars, but his nostrils flared, as if he were tasting the air. "We must go. The wind is changing." Clara did not understand. The air was still quiet. "What do you mean?" "The air is too quiet," he said. He had already turned and was moving, climbing out of the arroyo, heading for a spine of red rock that jutted up from the desert floor. "The storm is coming. A fast one. We must find shelter." It came upon them with the speed of an unholy revelation. The first sign was a low, mournful sound, like a great beast moaning, miles away. Then the stars vanished, one by one, snuffed out by a rising wall of yellow-brown. And then the wind hit. It was not a wind. It was a solid thing, a scouring pad of sand and grit that ripped the air from Clara's lungs and tried to tear the skin from her face. She cried out, but the sound was stolen from her mouth. She was blind, suffocating, a small, lost thing in a roaring, red universe. An arm wrapped around her waist. It was Atsa. He was a rock in the chaos. He did not pull her. He anchored her, his body shielding her from the worst of the blast. He shouted something, but she only heard the roar. He put his mouth to her ear, his breath hot against her cold skin. Walked to the rock. He half dragged, half carried her, his head down, pushing into the screaming void. The world was nothing but noise and pain. Sand filled her eyes, her mouth, her clothes. She could feel her own panic, a wild, bird-like fluttering in her chest, and she fought it down. He stopped, pulling her tight against him, and she felt him fumbling at the rock face. Then he fell, pulling her down with him, into a crevice, a low, dark opening in the stone. They tumbled onto a floor of soft, deep sand, out of the direct assault of the wind. He pulled her deeper, into a small alcove, a hollow in the red rock, barely tall enough to sit up in. The storm screamed past the mouth of their shelter, a living, furious entity. The small space was filled with the thunder of its passing, but they were, for the moment, safe. They sat in the dark for a long time, their breathing ragged. Clara was shaking, a deep, bone-chilling tremor she could not control. She was covered in grit, her hair a tangled mat. Atsa moved, and she flinched. He was just reaching for his canteen. He uncorked it, the small sound loud in the din. He held it out. "Drink," he said. She took it, her hands clumsy. The water was warm, metallic, and wonderful. She rinsed the mud from her mouth, spat, and then took a small, grateful sip. She passed it back. He drank, and then set the canteen down between them. "You are not from this land," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "No," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "I am from Kansas. We have wind, but not like this. This is biblical." "It is the land's breath," he said, his voice quiet, thoughtful. "It reminds us that we are small, that we do not own it." They sat in silence. The storm provided the only sound, a constant, high-pitched shriek. It was impossible to rest. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice coming out of the dark. "Do what?" "In the town. The money. The ring." Clara's hand instinctively went to her bare finger. The skin was raw. It was just a thing. A piece of metal? "It was not just a thing," he said, with the simple certainty of a man who saw the world for what it was. Clara sighed. The grit was in her throat. "I watched a mob like that one kill my husband. Or at least they allowed him to be killed. A man, a powerful man, wanted our land. Robert, my husband, he wrote letters. He spoke the truth. And he was found dead. They called it a hunting accident." She had not spoken these words aloud to anyone. Saying them now, in this dark, howling place, felt like lancing a wound. "He was a good man," she whispered. "A teacher. He believed in rules, in the law. And the law failed him. I saw you, in that cage, and I saw it happening again. I could not just walk away, not again." Atsa was silent for a long time. The wind seemed to be searching for them, its voice rising in pitch. "I know what it is," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "To have your world taken by men who speak of law. When I was a boy, they came, the soldiers. They said we had to leave our land, the land where my people had always been. They burned our homes, our orchards." He paused, and the darkness in the cave seemed to deepen. "They made us walk 300 miles, to a place, Bosque Redondo, a place of dry earth and bitter water. They called it the Long Walk. Many of our old people, our children, they did not finish the walk. They died on the side of the trail." He picked up a small pebble from the sandy floor, his fingers turning it over and over. "I was there for 4 years. I learned to be quiet. I learned to watch. I learned that a white man's promise is a wind that changes. When they finally let us go home, home was gone. I became a blacksmith. Iron does not lie." Clara felt a profound, aching sorrow. His story dwarfed her own. He had lost a nation. She had lost a man. But the source of their grief was the same, the casual, cruel arrogance of power. "Mr. Harrow," she said, "he is one of those men, the railroad. It is his long walk. He is pushing your people off the graze lands. He is pushing the Mexican ranchers off. And he is using you, your people, as the excuse." "Yes," Atsa said. "Then we must stop him," she said. and the words surprised her with their strength. "Stop a man like Harrow." His voice was hard, skeptical. "You cannot. He is not a man. He is the railroad. He is the new world. You cannot stop the wind." "We cannot stop the storm," Clara said, leaning forward, her eyes trying to find his in the dark. "But we are not in it. We are in this cave. We found shelter. We can find the proof. We can show the judge. Not just the coal, but the cattle. All of them." He was silent. "I know a place," he said at last. "A box canyon. Chola Wash. It is a good place to hide things. Horses, cattle. If they are holding the herd, they will be there." "Then we will go there," Clara said. "Rook will be hunting us," he said. "He is Harrow's man. He is not a fool. He will find the dead steer. He will know we are not running. He will know we are hunting him." "Then we must find the herd before he finds us," Clara said. A new understanding settled between them, as palpable as the sand on the floor. It was a promise, a pact, sealed in a red rock tomb, while the world tried to scour itself clean. The storm blew itself out by dawn. They emerged from the alcove into a world transformed. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the air sharp and cold. The desert floor was a new landscape of smooth, wind-carved dunes. Atsa found his own horses, 2 lean mustangs, hidden in a draw, protected from the worst of the wind. He had left them there before coming to town. He gave Clara the calmer of the 2, a bay mare. Clara's dress was torn, her shoes in tatters. He said nothing, but cut a length of rope from his saddle and showed her how to tie it, to blouse her skirt around her knees, freeing her legs to ride astride. His hands brushed hers as he showed her the knot. His touch was practical, impersonal, but she felt it like a spark. He showed her how to mount, how to grip with her knees, how to read the horse's ears. He was a man of few words, but his instruction was precise. He checked her saddle, adjusted her stirrup, his movements economical and sure. It was a strange, quiet intimacy, this tending to the details of survival. They rode north, toward the mountains, their horses picking their way through the new, soft sand. They stayed in the shadows of the rocks, Atsa's eyes constantly scanning the ridges, the sky. Near noon, he led them to a small vaquero camp near a hidden spring. A man with a deeply lined face and a drooping mustache, Miguel Ortega, rose from a small fire, his hand on his rifle. Until he saw Atsa, he relaxed, nodding a greeting. Atsa spoke to him in a low mix of Spanish and English. Clara caught words: harrow, cattle, railroad. Miguel nodded, his expression dark. He spat into the fire. "It is a bad thing, amigo," he said, his English thick but clear. "I saw it, last night, a train, but not on the schedule. It waited at the new siding, 5 miles west. 1 car, maybe 2, covered with a tarp. Why do you cover a cattle car? You do that to hide the brand. I saw men with rifles. Rook. He was there. He crossed himself. They are shipping the devil's beef. Jefe." The news settled on them, hard and cold. They were not just hiding the cattle. They were moving them, selling them. The raid was a business, and the tracks were the artery. As they rode away, Atsa's face was grim. He pushed the pace, moving into the high country. Late in the afternoon, he stopped, holding up a hand. He was looking at a far ridge, a mile or more distant. "We are not alone," he said. Clara squinted, but saw nothing but rocks and heat shimmer. "Who?" "Rook, or one of his men. He is good. He is tracking the storm. Not us. He knows where we would go for water. He is cutting us off." He urged his horse forward, not in a panic, but with a new, dangerous urgency. They rode into a labyrinth of canyons, the rock walls rising around them, red and claustrophobic. The path grew narrower. Just as the sun began to touch the western peaks, Atsa dismounted. He signaled for Clara to do the same, his finger to his lips. He led the horses into a thicket of juniper and tied them. He motioned for her to follow. They climbed a short, steep rise of slick rock, crawling the last few feet on their hands and knees. He stopped at the edge of a precipice. He pointed. Below them lay a long, narrow canyon. The walls were sheer, 1,000 feet high. The entrance, from what she could see, was a tight, narrow slot, barely wide enough for a wagon. It was a perfect, natural trap. And from the shadows of the canyon floor, rising in the still evening air, Clara heard it, the low, mournful sound of many cattle. They had found Chola Wash. They lay flat on the slick rock, the stones still holding the day's warmth against their chests. The sun had vanished, leaving a deep, aching purple in the sky that was slowly being pinned with stars. Below them, in the dark trough of Chola Wash, a new, man-made star was born. A fire, small at first, then growing, casting leaping, jagged shadows against the canyon walls. The bawling of the cattle grew more distressed. Figures moved around the fire, dark shapes against the light. Clara could smell the smoke, thick with the acrid stench of burning hair and flesh. "They are doing it now?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Changing the brands." Atsa said nothing. He was watching the entrance to the canyon, a narrow slot a half-mile distant, where 2 men sat silhouetted with rifles across their laps. He had been counting. 6 men. 2 at the gate, 4 at the fire. They are sloppy. They believe they are safe here. "The train," Clara said, her mind fitting the pieces together. "Miguel said he saw it last night. They are branding these, moving them tonight." "Yes," Atsa said. He pointed. A few yards from the fire, a crude table had been set up, made of planks laid across barrels. A lantern sat on it, and a man was bent over, writing in a large book. That is the count, the bill of lading, for the railroad. Clara felt the cold resolve harden inside her. "I need that book, and I need one of those." She pointed to the fire, where a man had just thrown a branding iron back into the coals. It was the crude circle cross, the liar's brand, as Atsa had called it. Atsa turned his head to look at her. In the faint starlight, his face was a mask of hard plains and shadows. He was a blacksmith. He knew the hot iron. He was a guide. He knew the land. He was a survivor. He knew the cost of fighting. "It is too dangerous," he said. His voice was flat. "More dangerous than that cage," she countered, the whisper sharp. "More dangerous than the lies they will tell the judge. We have 3 days. Atsa, no, we have less. We have until that train arrives. Without that book, without that brand, we are just 2 people with a story, and our kind of story. It does not win against men like Harrow." He looked at her for a long time. He saw no fear in her eyes. He saw the same thing he had seen in the plaza, a terrible, unbending resolve. He had seen it in his own mother, as she had faced the soldiers. He gave a single, sharp nod. "There is a game trail," he said, "down the far wall. It is for goats. It is steep." "I can manage," she said. "I will go first," he said. "When we are at the bottom, I will make a noise, a large one. Up here, the men at the fire will send 1, maybe 2, to look. The men at the gate are too far. When they are drawn away, you will go, for the book and the iron." She said, her stomach tightening. "You are a shadow," he said. "You are a woman. They will not look for you. I am what they hunt. They will look for me. You will be invisible." He slipped away into the darkness, as silent as the rock itself. Clara was alone on the precipice. She was a teacher. She corrected grammar. She taught arithmetic. And now she was about to crawl into a camp of armed cattle thieves to steal hot iron. She thought of Robert's body, of the hunting accident. Her hand stopped shaking. A full 10 minutes passed. It felt like a year. Then, from high up on the opposite rim of the canyon, a sound like a small crack of thunder, a grinding, slipping, and then a roar as a shower of rocks and scree cascaded down the canyon wall. far from the camp, but loud enough to shake the stars. What in the hell? A voice floated up from the fire.
"It is just a slide,"
another shouted. You two, a third voice, one with authority, barked. Cass Rook. His voice was like gravel in a tin cup. Go check that, see if it blocked the north trail. And be quick about it. That train will be at the siding in 2 hours. Clara watched as two men grabbed their rifles and trotted off into the darkness. Grumbling. Now, Atsa's voice said, right beside her. He had reappeared as if from the stone. Stay in the shadows of the rocks. Do not step on a stick. Go! He gave her a slight push, and she was moving, slipping and sliding down the goat trail, her torn dress catching on thorns, her heart a cold drum against her ribs. She reached the canyon floor, a river of soft sand. She paused, breathing, listening. The men at the fire were working again, the sizzle of the brand and the pained lowing of a calf covering her small sounds. Rook was at the table, talking to the man with the book. "And tell that station master in El Paso this is the last run for this price," Rook was saying. "Harrow can squeeze them. Or I will." The man with the book laughed. "Yes, sir, Mr. Rook." Rook turned to check the corral. The man with the book closed it, set it on the plank table, and walked over to the fire to get a cup of coffee. Clara moved. She was a shadow, as Atsa had said. She kept low, her thin shoes making no sound. 10 feet, 5. She was at the table. The lantern light fell on the ledger. Her hand darted out. She grabbed the book. She saw the last entry, 200 head, and the signature at the bottom of the page. It was not a name. It was just 2 stark, powerful initials. L.H. She tucked the book into the waistband of her dress, the rough leather cover scratching her skin. Now, the iron. It was leaning against the fire pit, the end still glowing a faint, dull red. It was cooling, but it was still hot enough. She needed it. A man walked past her, his back to her, heading for the corral. She slipped in behind him. The heat of the fire washed over her face. She grabbed a discarded piece of canvas, a rag used for wiping grease. She lunged, wrapped the canvas around the iron's handle, and lifted. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. A man by the fire turned. "Hey, who?" Clara did not hesitate. She ran back toward the goat trail, clutching the heavy iron.
"Hey," the man yelled, "stop, it is a woman!"
The shout was one of pure shock, which gave her another second.
"Rook, someone is in the camp, a woman."
She heard the heavy pound of boots on sand, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. She was at the base of the trail. Up Atsa's voice came from the darkness above. She scrambled, dropping the canvas-wrapped iron. Grabbing it again, her hands raw. A shot rang out. The bullet whined off the rock, just inches from her head, sending stone chips stinging into her cheek. She cried out, more in terror than pain. A hand, hard as iron, grabbed her wrist. "Atsa!" He pulled her up the last few feet, bodily hauling her over the lip of the ridge. "They are coming," she gasped. "We do not go back the way we came," he said, pulling her along. He ran, not with panic, but with a hunter's driving purpose. He led her along the rim, away from their horses. "Our horses," she said, gasping for breath.
"They will find them," he panted. "We go this way. There is water."
Another shot, this one from closer. Rook. He was on the trail, and he was fast. There, Rook's voice echoed in the canyon. "On the rim, get him." Atsa stopped at a cleft in the rock. A sheer drop. Clara looked down and saw, 100 feet below, the faint, silver gleam of water. A creek. "This is your water," she shrieked. "It is our only way," he said. He grabbed her. "You must trust me." He did not wait for an answer. He pushed them both off the edge. It was a terrifying, breathless fall, broken by a jarring, painful crash into icy water. Clara swallowed a mouthful. The water was deep, but her heavy skirts and the weight of the iron were pulling her down. She let go of the brand.
No,
She choked, fumbling in the dark water. His hand found hers, and then his hand found the iron. He shoved it into her grasp.
hold it.
He swam, one-armed, pulling her with him. The creek was narrow, the rock walls slick. They moved through the darkness, the sounds of the men on the ridge growing fainter. Then she smelled it, a foul, chemical stench, like the coal at the fire pit. The water was slick, coated with a black, greasy film.
What is it?
She sputtered.
From the railroad camp.
Atsa said, his voice tight with disgust.
They're tar pits. It washes down. Keep your head up.
They swam through the oily sludge for 20 yards, the foulness coating their skin, their clothes. Finally, he pulled them to a low bank where the creek widened. They clawed their way out, covered in black, stinking tar, soaked and freezing. Above them, on the trail, they heard horses.
He is on our trail,
Atsa whispered, pushing her into the cover of a boulder. Clara looked. It was Rook and 2 men, riding hard, and she saw, tethered to a tree just yards from their position, 3 fresh horses, Rook's remounts, left there for the chase. As Rook and his men thundered past, Atsa tensed, ready to run. Clara put a hand on his arm. Wait. She drew the knife he had given her. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. She looked at the tethered horses, then at him. He understood. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He stepped out from the rock, picked up a stone, and threw it hard against the far canyon wall. Who is there, one of Rook's men, lagging behind, yelled, stopping his horse. In that moment of distraction, Clara ran. She lunged for the horses, sawing at the leather reins. The knife was sharp. The first rope snapped. The second, the third. She slapped the last horse on the rump, and all 3 animals, spooked, bolted into the night, disappearing down the canyon. The man who had stopped yelled in fury and fired his pistol into the darkness. Atsa grabbed Clara's waist, pulling her back.
Now we run.
They scrambled up the bank, into the broken country. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Atsa's shirt, a hot, burning line. He grunted, a sharp intake of breath, but did not slow. He pushed her ahead of him, and they melted into the labyrinth of rocks. They did not stop for what felt like hours. They ran until Clara's lungs were fire and her legs were water. Finally, Atsa pulled them into a shallow cave, hidden by a curtain of ancient gnarled juniper. He collapsed onto the sandy floor, breathing hard. Clara slumped beside him, her entire body a symphony of pain. She was still clutching the ledger and the heavy, canvas-wrapped brand. She had not let them go. We made it, she gasped. He did not answer. He was leaning against the rock, his head back, his eyes closed. His left side was dark. Atsa, she said, the fear returning. Are you... She saw it then, the tear in his shirt, and the dark, steady flow of blood that soaked through the fabric. He had been hit. You are hurt, she whispered. It is nothing, he said, his voice strained. A scratch. It is not a scratch, she said, her teacher's voice returning, sharp and authoritative. She scrambled in her reticule. It was soaked, coated in tar, but the contents were protected by the oilcloth lining. She pulled out her mending kit, a small, tin box with needles, thread, and a small pair of scissors. This will hurt, she said, pulling the knife from her belt. She cut his shirt open, the blade slicing the wet, terry cloth. It was not a bullet. A bullet would have been worse. It was a long, deep gash on his shoulder, either from a ricochet, a rock splinter from the shot that had grazed him, or a knife in the dark. It was bleeding, sluggishly now, but it was deep. Hold still, she commanded. She took his canteen, poured water onto a scrap of her torn petticoat, and began to clean the wound. It was covered in filth, tar, and sand. He hissed. A sharp sound in the back of his throat, his whole body going rigid, but he did not pull away. "I am sorry," she whispered.
Just do it,
He bit out, his eyes squeezed shut. She cleaned it as best she could. The gash was 4 inches long, gaping. It needed stitching. She threaded a needle with steady hands. Her hands, which had been covered in filth, were now strangely clean, scoured by the water and sand. "I only have this," she said, holding up the needle. "It is for tending clothes." He opened his eyes. He looked at her, at the needle, and then at her face. He saw her determination, the small, worried lines around her mouth, the utter lack of fear. He saw a partner. "It will do," he said. She made the first stitch. He did not move, save for the tightening of his jaw. She worked quickly, her stitches small and neat. It was a strange, profound intimacy. The cave was silent, save for their breathing and the sound of the wind. She was mending him, her head bent low, her face illuminated by the first faint hint of a rising moon. His blood was on her hands. Her safety was because of his strength. They were bound, not by a ring, but by shared water, shared fire, and shared blood. When she was finished, she tore another strip of cloth and bandaged the wound tightly. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough. "We are even," she whispered, her fingers brushing the bandage. She sat back, exhausted. They were alive, they were safe, and they had the proof. "Now what?" he asked, his voice tired. Clara looked at the ledger, at the brand. "Now we go back, not to the wild, to the town." "They will kill us," he said. "Not if we are smart," she said, the plan forming, clear and sharp. "In 2 days, it is the feast of San Isidro, the festival. The entire town will be in the plaza. Everyone, Father O'Rourke, Marchetta, even Harrow. They cannot hang you in front of the entire town at a festival, not without a hearing. And we will give them a hearing." While they planned, miles away in San Isidro, Lucius Harrow stood on the balcony of the new hotel, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked down as Sheriff Pike, looking smaller and older, accepted a large folded paper, a donation for $500 to the San Isidro Town Improvement Fund, enough to build a new school and a new, proper brick jail. The small crowd, bought with free whiskey, cheered. Pike, trapped, raised the paper in the air, his face a mask of misery. Further down the street, a single shot rang out, almost lost in the celebration. A bullet from a heavy rifle smashed the front window of Marchetta's cantina, shattering the glass, embedding itself in the thick adobe wall. Just above the table where Marchetta sat, counting her receipts, a warning, delivered with the cold precision of a man who enjoyed his work. Cass Rook reined his horse in the shadows and smiled. The town was learning its lesson. They did not return to San Isidro by the main road. Atza led Clara on a long, winding path through the broken land, following dry arroyos and ancient footpaths that only he knew. His wound, she could tell, pained him, but he said nothing. He simply moved, his face a mask of endurance. Clara, coated in drying, stinking tar, her dress in tatters, her hands raw from the hot iron, simply followed. The ledger was a hard, square shape against her ribs. The branding iron was wrapped in the canvas and tied to her saddle, which they had recovered along with Atza's horse, untouched, just as he had predicted. They skirted the town and went to the small adobe church, its white walls glowing in the moonlight. They did not go to the door. Atza let out a low, soft whistle, the call of a nighthawk. A moment later, the sacristy door opened, and Father O'Rourke emerged, his white hair a chaotic halo. He saw them, and his face, illuminated by the lamp he carried, was a mask of shock. "Lord preserve us," he breathed, seeing their state. "You look as if you have crawled out of the pit itself. Get inside, quickly." He led them into his small office, which smelled of old books, beeswax, and a faint, sweet scent of incense. He barred the door. "He was right," Clara said, her voice cracking. She untied the ledger from her waist, her stiff fingers fumbling. "Harrow, it is all here." She placed the heavy book on his desk. Then she unwrapped the branding iron. The cloth was singed, and the Circle Cross brand, black and malevolent, seemed to soak up the lamplight. The priest stared at the items, his face as grim as a skull. He made the sign of the cross, not in piety, but in a gesture of deep, weary horror. "So it is true. The rumors, the whispers. We need to hide these," Clara said, "and we need allies." "You need a doctor," Father O'Rourke said, looking at Atsa, who was leaning against the wall, his face pale beneath the grime. "There is no time," Atsa said, his voice low. "The festival in 2 days." One day, the priest corrected him. "It begins tomorrow night, the feast of San Isidro. The town is already preparing." "Good," Clara said. "That is when we will do it." A plan was formed in that small, candle-lit room. A desperate, fragile plan. Father O'Rourke would hide the real ledger and the iron. Atsa, his wound tended again by the priest with cleaner bandages and a dose of carbolic, would go to his sister, Shia, who lived in the small encampment of diny weavers and silversmiths just outside town. He would warn them, and he would ask her to send word to the other ranchers who had been pushed by Harrow's men. Clara would find Miguel Ortega, and they would find the young artist, Addie, a quiet girl with a sketchbook who saw everything. Before they parted, Father O'Rourke put his hand on Clara's. "Child," he said, his Irish lilt thick with concern. "You are lighting a fire. Be sure you are not the one who is consumed." "I am already ashes." "Father," she said, "it does not matter." She found lodging at a small, clean rooming house run by a Pueblo woman, far from the hotel. She bathed, scrubbing the tar from her skin until it was raw, the black, oily water a testament to their journey. She bought a simple, new dress, gray and practical, and a pair of sturdy boots. As she paid for them, she felt the phantom weight of her ring, the empty space on her finger. She had no money left. She was, quite literally, all in. She found Miguel Ortega mending a bridle in the livery, his face dark with worry. When she told him what they had found, he dropped the leather, his hands shaking. "Rook, he shot at Marchetta's," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear and anger. "A warning. He is not a man. Senora, he is a snake. But what you ask, it is right. I will stand. My cousins, the Diegos, they will stand. They lost Graysland last month." Next, she found Addie, a young woman of perhaps 20, with spectacles and an intense, quiet gaze, who was sketching the mission church. Clara sat with her, and she did not need to be convinced. "Mr. Harrow asked me to paint a picture of his rail car," Addie said, her voice soft but sharp. "He wanted it to look heroic. I sketched the siding at Chola Wash instead. I did not know what it was. I saw the men and the tarps. It felt wrong." She opened her sketchbook. There, in charcoal, was a perfect, damning drawing of the illegal siding, the covered cars, the men with rifles. "Can you," Clara asked, her voice tight, "draw this?" She showed Addie the brand, and this, she showed her the survey map she had taken from the post. Addie looked at them, her artist's eye assessing the lines. I will make copies. Copies are harder to burn." The pieces were falling into place, but as the alliance grew, so did the tension. Clara and Atsa met again in the shadows of the church, the night before the festival. He had brought his sister, Shaya. She was a woman as straight and strong as a juniper, her eyes holding the same deep, appraising calm as her brother's. She looked at Clara, not with suspicion, but with a weighing, measuring gaze. "You have bound my brother to you," Shia said, her English precise. "You put on his bandage, but you have also put a target on his back, and on ours." "I am trying to remove the target from all of you," Clara said. By painting a larger one, Shia asked. She looked at Atsa. A long, silent communication passing between them. He was struggling. Clara could see it. The deep, ingrained pull to protect his people, to melt back into the canyons where men like Rook could not find them, was at war with the stand he had taken. He was a man of the earth, not of the plaza. "It is my choice." "Shia," Atsa said. This is a good fight." Shia nodded, accepting, but her gaze on Clara remained complicated. Clara, too, was struggling. When she was near him, her world, which had been gray with grief, felt sharp, clear, and dangerously bright. She was aware of his presence, of the solid strength of his shoulder, of the low timbre of his voice. It was more than just a partnership. It was a current, pulling her toward a shore she had not known she was seeking. She was a widow, a teacher. He was a Daine blacksmith, a man branded an outlaw. The chasm between their worlds was as deep as Chola Wash. To cross it was to invite a different kind of ruin. She pushed the thought away. This was about justice. It had to be. The next morning, the day of the festival, the second hammer fell. Clara was walking to the market when she saw the crowd. It was in front of the sheriff's office again. But this was not a lynch mob. This was an official proceeding. Lucius Harrow was there, looking somber and respectful. Sheriff Pike stood beside him, looking miserable. And in front of them, a gaunt, nervous-looking man, a ranch hand, was raising his right hand. "I do swear," the man was saying, his voice quavering, "that I saw him. That night, I saw the Navajo, Atsa Yazi, leading the raid. Him and 20 others. I saw it with my own eyes." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not rumor. This was a sworn oath. "A witness," Harrow said, his voice carrying, filled with regret. A brave man, coming forward, despite the danger. Sheriff Pike, his face the color of wet ash, unpinned a paper from his board. In light of this testimony, the civil surety for Atsa Yazi, posted by Mrs. Clara Whitfield, is hereby revoked. The bond is forfeit. A warrant is issued for the arrest of Atsa Yazi for cattle rustling and for the new charge of flight from justice. He is to be considered armed and dangerous. He had not even looked at Clara, though he knew she was there. He had sold himself, bought and paid for. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, her money, her ring, gone. The legal protection, which she had thought so clever, vanished. Atsa was a fugitive again, and she was the woman who had harbored him. She had to warn him. She turned, but Cass Rook was standing 10 feet away, smiling at her, his teeth yellow. He knew. He had been waiting for this. He and 2 of his men began to follow her, their steps casual, unhurried. They were toying with her. She walked, not running, to the church. She burst in. Father O'Rourke was there. "He is gone," the priest said, his face a mask of fury. "Shia came for him an hour ago. They knew. The witness is a lie. He is a drunk from El Paso, paid by Rook." "They are hunting him?" Clara said. "Then God help them if they find him," the priest said. "No, our plan must move. Tonight, you must do it." Clara was stunned. Without him. Especially without him. He is the one they want. But you are the one who holds the proof. Addie has the drawings. Miguel and his cousins are ready. Tonight, at the festival, when the whole town is in the plaza, you will give them a hearing they cannot ignore. Night fell. San Isidro, oblivious to the storm gathering, lit itself up. Paper lanterns, brought on the railroad, were strung between the buildings. A guitar and a fiddle played in the plaza. The smell of roasted corn and sweet cakes filled the air. The entire town was out, celebrating. Clara stood on the edge of the crowd, her heart hammering. Addie was beside her, holding a roll of her drawings. Miguel and 3 other vaqueros, their faces grim, stood near the fountain. Marchetta and Father O'Rourke were near the platform that had been set up for the mayor. And then she saw them. Lucius Harrow, accepting applause as the town's benefactor. Sheriff Pike, standing next to him, a puppet on a string. And Cass Rook, at the edge of the plaza, watching, his rifle cradled in his arm. "Now," Father O'Rourke said. Clara Whitfield walked onto the platform. The music faltered. The chatter died. "Mrs. Whitfield," the mayor said, confused. Clara walked to the center. She was terrified. She was shaking. But she thought of Robert, and she thought of the cage, and her voice, when it came, was clear and cold. "My name is Clara Whitfield. I came here seeking peace. I found a lie." She unrolled the first of Addie's drawings. It was the survey map, blown up, clear and precise. "I was told Mr. Atsa Yazi was a raider. I found that he was a man being framed by men who want his land, and the land of the Double R." A roar of confusion and anger from the crowd. "This is Mr. Harrow's own survey map," she cried out, showing his railroad, cutting through the land he is accusing the Navajo of raiding. "This is an outrage," Harrow called out, his face a mask of civilized indignation. "No, sir, this is an outrage." Clara unrolled the second drawing. It was the branding iron. "This is the brand they are using, a liar's brand, to blame the dying." "That proves nothing," Rook's voice, from the darkness. "And this," Clara's voice cracked, but she held on. She unrolled the third drawing. It was Addie's sketch of the illegal sighting. "This is Chola Wash, where they hide the stolen cattle before shipping them, on Mr. Harrow's own trains." The crowd was a sea of shifting faces. Confusion, anger, doubt. They were split.
"She is a liar,"
the fake witness shouted, his voice high with fear.
"She is his lover."
"And this," Clara shouted, her voice breaking.
"This is the proof. The shipping ledger. From their own camp."
She pulled the ledger from her satchel. The real one. She had not been able to part with it. She held it high. And in that moment, Cass Rook acted. He did not fire at her. That would make her a martyr. He was smarter than that. He fired at the town. He raised his rifle and shot. Not at a person, but at a lantern, high above the feed store, next to the warehouse where the winter supplies were kept. The lantern exploded. A second shot, and a keg of lamp oil stacked against the wall erupted in a sheet of blue flame. "Fire!" a woman screamed. The dry wooden warehouse went up like a torch. The crowd, which had been a debating body, became a panicked mob, screaming, pushing, running from the heat. Rook's plan was brilliant. Chaos. In the chaos, the ledger would be lost, the woman forgotten, the night's accusations burned away with the town's supplies. But he had not counted on Atsayazi. A shadow emerged from the alley, moving against the tide of people. It was Atsa. He was not running. He was hunting. He saw Clara, trapped on the platform as the fire roared, the ledger still in her hand. Rook was moving toward her, using the panic as cover. Rook raised his rifle, this time at her. And Atsa was on him. Not with a gun. He hit him with his shoulder, a driving, silent force that sent Rook sprawling, his rifle clattering on the stones. Rook snarled, drawing his knife, but Atsa was gone, melted back. He was at the platform, grabbing Clara's arm. The book. She gave it to him. He stuffed it inside his own shirt. "The fire!" a woman screamed. "My children! They were in the wagon! They are in the warehouse!" The whole front of the building was an inferno. Rook, his face contorted with rage, saw his chance. He grabbed his rifle and ran, not at Atsa, but into the burning warehouse. Toward the back, he was going to burn the ledger, and the man carrying it. "No!" Clara screamed. Atsa did not hesitate. He ran in after him. The crowd was frozen, watching the horror. The fire was a roaring beast. And then Shia was there, and Miguel pulling people back, organizing a bucket brigade. Addie, the artist, was not panicking. She stood, her face pale, her sketchbook open, her charcoal flying, capturing the scene, the flames, the crowd, and the unmistakable lean figure of Cass Rook, outlined against the fire as he disappeared inside. Sheriff Pike, his face white, his authority in ashes, finally snapped. He drew his pistol. This was his town, his people.
"Rook!" he bellowed, running toward the fire. "By God, Rook, you are under arrest!"
Two of Rook's men, who had been setting smaller fires, stepped from the shadows and grabbed him. One hit him, hard, in the stomach. Pike crumpled, his gun taken, his authority gone, left gasping in the dust as the town he was meant to protect burned. Lucius Harrow watched, his face impassive. From the hotel balcony, he took a small sip of his brandy. Inside the inferno, the floor groaned. Shia, who had been pulling a panicked horse away, saw a small child, frozen in terror near the loading dock. She ran, grabbing the child, tossing him to safety, just as a burning beam crashed down. It struck her, a glancing blow, and she fell, her arm pinned, the fire searing her sleeve. Atsa, choking on smoke, had lost Rook. He saw his sister. He roared, a sound of pure, animal rage, and ran to her, pulling the smoldering wood off her arm. She was conscious, but in pain. Clara, who had followed him, was helping the child.
"Get her out!" Atsa yelled.
They half-dragged, half-carried Shia out into the square, her arm smoking, her face tight with pain. The warehouse roof collapsed with a sound like the end of the world. A column of sparks, a billion angry stars, shot into the sky. Rook was gone. The ledger was safe, still hot against Atsa's skin. But the town was burning. Atsa looked at the flames, at his sister, at Clara. He wanted to run. He wanted to take Shia to the mountains, to the quiet places, to heal. He wanted to take Clara from this town that would only, ever, try to kill her.
"We have to go,"
he said, his voice ragged, pulling at Shia.
"No,"
Clara said, her face black with soot, her eyes burning with a fever he had not seen before. "We do not look." She pointed. The bucket brigade was working. Miguel, Father O'Rourke, Marchetta, even Addie, Anglo, Mexican, Pueblo. They were fighting the fire, together.
"We go now," Clara said, "and we lose. We stay. We go to the end."
She coughed, her lungs raw. She turned to go back, to help. As she passed her rooming house, a young boy ran up and shoved a piece of paper into her hand. "From a man, ma'am, he paid me a dime." She opened it. The paper was hot from the fire in the street. The handwriting was crude, a scrawl.
"Leave Atsa. Live. Stay. Be buried."
She crumpled it in her fist. The fire in the square was nothing to the one in her heart. The fire was a smoking, stinking wound in the heart of the plaza. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the high mesas, the warehouse was gone. The feed store was a pile of black, steaming rubble. Where the festival had been, there was now only ash, broken glass, and the smell of defeat. They met in the one part of the church that had survived, the small, stone-walled baptistery. Father O'Rourke, his face a mask of soot and fury. Miguel, his arm in a sling, his eyes burning. Addie, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her face pale. Shia was there, her burned arm wrapped in clean linen, her face tight with pain and an unbending, cold anger. And Clara and Atsa, they were a vision from a lower world, still covered in grime, soot, and the memory of the fire. Atsa laid the scorched ledger on the stone font. The leather cover was blistered and curled. The edges of the pages were black and brittle. "It is alive," Atsa said, "but it is wounded." "As is the town," Father O'Rourke said, his voice a low growl. He touched the book. This is not enough. Not now. Rook turned your proof into a weapon against us. He showed the town that justice brings fire. They are terrified. Pike is a prisoner in his own office. Harrow is untouched. So we get more proof, Clara said. Her voice was a dry rasp. The smoke had ruined it. There is no more, Miguel said, wincing as he shifted his arm. The cattle in Chola Wash. They are gone. Rook will have moved them, or scattered them. The camp will be ashes, like this one. He did not move all of them, Atsa said, his voice quiet. Everyone turned to him. He was looking at the small, high window, toward the railroad tracks. He did not have time. The fire was his distraction, but it was also his prison. He had to stay, to manage his men. The train, Clara whispered, the pieces clicking into place. Miguel, you said he would not stop the train. Miguel nodded, his eyes widening. It is due tonight, at the siding. He has to move the last of the cattle. He has a contract to fill. A contract, Father O'Rourke said, his gaze becoming sharp. A contract, yes, the telegraph. A train does not move without the wire, the orders, the shipping manifests. They will be in the station. A new, desperate plan was forged in that cold stone room. It was a plan born of ashes, a wild, improbable gamble. Rook will be at the train, Atsa said. He will guard it with his life. It is his escape, and his payment. Then we will take it from him, Clara said. We cannot fight him and his men, Miguel argued. They are 30, we are 5, and wounded. We will not fight, Atsa said. We will, he paused, searching for the English word. Scatter them, as the wind scatters the dry leaves. Father, Clara said, turning to the priest, you are a man of God. No one would suspect you. The telegraph office, the station master is a weak man. He is afraid of God, but he is more afraid of Harrow. Can you... Father O'Rourke's grim face broke into a hard, joyless smile. I can hear his confession. Yes, whether he wants to give it or not. Addie, Clara continued, your sketches are our memory. Stay with Shia. Stay safe. Guard the ledger. And us, Miguel asked, looking at Clara and Atsa. We, Clara said, her eyes meeting Atsa's, are going to stop a train. Midnight found them not at the station, but at the Chola Wash siding, the place of Addie's sketch. The train was there, a long, dark spine in the moonlight. The engine hissed, steam leaking from its joints like a sleeping dragon's breath. At the far end, men on horses were loading the last of the cattle into 2 cars, their shouts and curses thin in the vast, cool dark. And just as Miguel had predicted, there was a boxcar, separate from the others. Being guarded by 2 men, it was not a cattle car. Clara, Atsa, and Miguel lay on a low rise, watching. There, Clara whispered, pointing to the boxcar. The supplies. The tar. And there, Atsa said, his voice tight. Cass Rook was on the platform, a lantern in his hand, yelling at the men. He was impatient. He was nervous. How do we get past him? Miguel breathed. We do not, Atsa said. He touched Clara's arm. Wait here. He slipped away. Not a man, but a shadow, melting into the rocks. Clara and Miguel waited, the silence stretching, broken only by the clank of the engine and the distant shouts. A full 5 minutes passed. Then, from the north, a new sound, a low, rolling thunder. It was not a storm. It was hooves. Atsa had found a small band of mustangs, grazing in a hidden valley. He was behind them, a dark shape on his horse, pushing them, guiding them. He did not stampede them at the train. He stampeded them past it. 100 yards out, a sudden, chaotic rush of wild, screaming horseflesh. The men at the loading dock yelled in alarm. What is that? Rook roared. Is it an attack? Get to the horses. The guards, spooked, turned from the train and ran toward the sound, their rifles up, thinking it was a raid. Even Rook, drawn by the pure, violent energy, took a step, peering into the darkness, distracted. "Now," Clara said. She and Miguel ran low and fast, sprinting from the rocks, across the open ground, toward the boxcar. The two guards there had been drawn, like all the others, by the sound of the Mustangs. They had moved 20 feet from their post. Clara and Miguel were at the car. The door was heavy, but unlocked. Miguel put his good shoulder to it, groaning with the effort, and slid it open just enough. Clara was inside, in the dark, fumbling. She smelled it, the sharp, chemical stench. Tar. "Here," she whispered, her hands finding a large, rough barrel. "You are not supposed to be here." The voice was cold, flat, and right behind them, Cass Rook. He had not been fooled for long. He stood there, silhouetted against the moonlight, his revolver in his hand. He ignored Miguel. His eyes were on Clara. "I warned you," he said, his voice almost sad. "I told you to leave. Now you have burned a town." "You burned the town," Clara spat, her hand finding a heavy coupling pin on the floor. "It does not matter," Rook said, raising his pistol. Miguel lunged. He hit Rook low, with his good shoulder. A vaquero's tackle. The gun went off. The shot, a deafening, echoing blast inside the car. The bullet tore into the wooden ceiling, showering them with splinters. Rook brought the barrel of the gun down, hard, on Miguel's head. Miguel crumpled, groaning. Clara screamed, swinging the coupling pin. Rook caught her wrist, twisting it. The pin clattered to the floor. He was immensely strong. He pulled her close, his other hand grabbing her hair, pulling her head back. "Harrow pays for cattle," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "He pays me to clean up, and you, ma'am, are a mess." The train, with a sudden, violent lurch, began to move. The engineer, startled by the gunshot, was pulling out. The lurch threw them both. Clara fell hard. Rook kept his feet, grabbing a handhold. He looked down at her, a real, cold smile on his face. A perfect ending, a ride to nowhere. The car door was still open. A shape appeared in it. Atsa. He had circled back, silent. He was in the doorway, balancing on the moving train, a coil of rope in his hand. Rook saw him and his smile widened. "Both of you." He raised his pistol. Atsa did not climb in. He threw the rope. It was not a lasso. It was a weapon, a length of heavy hemp. He threw it like a whip, the knotted end catching Rook across the wrist, the same wrist that held the gun. Rook roared, his fingers spasming open. The pistol flew from his grasp, skittering across the floor. Atsa was in the car. He and Rook stared at each other. This was not a fight of guns. This was older. Two men, in a dark, moving box. Rook lunged, pulling his knife. Atsa met him, not with a weapon, but with his body. They crashed against the wall, a tangle of pure, violent motion. Atsa's wound tore open, a fresh, hot pain, but he ignored it. He was a blacksmith. He was used to pain. Clara scrambled, finding the gun. She aimed it, her hands shaking so badly she could not hold it steady. "Stay out of it," Atsa yelled, blocking a vicious knife thrust. She saw Miguel, stirring. She went to him. Rook was strong, but Atsa was faster, fueled by a lifetime of quiet, contained rage. He slammed Rook's knife hand against the wall. The knife dropped. Atsa hit him. A hard, solid blow to the stomach. Rook doubled over, gasping. The train was picking up speed, clattering over the rails. Atsa grabbed Rook by the shirt. He was going to throw him from the train. "No," Clara shouted. "We need him." "We need him dead," Atsa roared, his face a stranger's.
"We need the proof," Clara screamed, her eyes wild. She pointed, not at Rook, but at the barrel. "The tar help me." The barrel, the proof. Rook, seeing his chance, seeing them distracted, slammed his head back into Atsa's face. Atsa staggered, his nose breaking with a wet crunch. Rook did not go for a weapon. He ran. He scrambled to the open door, looked at the dark, rushing ground, and he jumped. He hit the ballast, rolled, and was gone, consumed by the night. Atsa was on his knees, blood pouring from his nose. Clara was at his side, her hands on him. "Are you all right?" He pushed her away, roughly, grabbing the edge of the open door, spitting blood. He was furious. "He is gone." "But we are not," she said, her voice shaking, but firm. She went to the barrel. "Help me!" He looked at her, at the barrel, at the open door. He understood. This was her brand, her proof. Together, they put their shoulders to it. It was heavy, full. They rolled it to the edge. "Now," she cried. They heaved. The barrel tipped, balanced for a heart-stopping second, and then fell, tumbling from the train, crashing onto the tracks below. It burst open, a great black splash, a dark, stinking flag, planted on Harrow's iron road. They stood at the open door, watching the stain recede, the wind cold on their faces, the train carrying them into the dark. Miles away, in the telegraph office, Father O'Rourke had found the night operator, a young man pale with fear. "I cannot, Father," the man stammered. "Mr. Harrow's orders. All manifests are private." Father O'Rourke leaned in, his face black with soot, a death's head in the lamplight. "My son," he said, his voice a low, Irish rumble. "You are afraid of Mr. Harrow, who can take your job. That is understandable. But you are about to be afraid of me, for I am a servant of God, who can take your soul. And I must tell you, he is very, very angry tonight." He walked out 5 minutes later, a long, yellow spool of telegraph paper in his pocket. It was the order, LH to El Paso cattle brokers, 200 head, as agreed. The sky, which had been a clear, starry canvas, was changing. Clouds, thick and bruised, were rolling in from the east, blotting out the moon. They had jumped from the train a mile later, a hard, painful roll in the scrub. Miguel was conscious, but dazed. Atsa's face was a mask of blood. Clara was shaking. They huddled under a rock overhang as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Then the sky split. A bolt of lightning, white and jagged, struck the ridge above them, illuminating the world in a single, silent, blue-white flash. It was followed by a crack of thunder that shook the ground. And then the heavens opened, a cold, driving rain, a deluge, turning the dust to instant, running mud. It washed the blood from Atsa's face. It washed the soot from Clara's skin. But they all knew what it was doing. Miles back, at the tracks, the rain was washing the dust, but it would not wash the tar. It would only smear it, spread it, turn it into a long, black, undeniable accusation. A stain, a handprint of guilt, left for the world to see. Clara shivered, a deep, bone-rattling chill. Atsa, saying nothing, took the blanket from his bedroll, the only dry thing they had, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked at him, her eyes dark in the flashes of lightning. She leaned, not against him, but into the warmth of the wool, her shoulder just brushing his. He hesitated. Then his arm came around her, not in a caress, not in possession, but as an anchor, a shared, solid presence in the screaming wind and the rain. They sat like that for a long time, two exhausted, battered people, watching the storm try to wash the world clean. "He got away," she whispered, her voice dead. "Rook, he will go back to town. He will be waiting." He will not find us,
Atsa said, his voice thick from his broken nose. No, Clara said. She pulled away, the blanket still around her. The fire was back, a cold, hard flame in her eyes. He will, because we will be there. In the plaza. In the morning. Father O'Rourke found them an hour later, a soaked, triumphant ghost, holding up the spool of telegraph paper like a holy relic. He has bought the law. He has burned the evidence. He has beaten the sheriff, the priest said, his voice ringing. But he forgot. The wire never lies. Tomorrow, Mrs. Whitfield. We demand a hearing, a public one. We will not be moved. They looked at the town, a wounded shadow in the distance. The rain was washing it. And tomorrow, they would bring the truth. The rain had stopped, but the world was a cold, dripping sea of mud. Atsa led them away from the sodden town, not toward the mountains, but into the low, tangled scrubland where the dine weavers kept their camp. The air was sharp, smelling of wet sage and the deep, clean scent of juniper. Shia's hogan was a solid, six-sided structure of mud and logs, its door facing east, to greet the dawn. It was a shape as old as the land itself. A thin, pale line of smoke rose from the central smoke hole, a sign of life in the darkness. When they entered, the warmth was a physical thing, a blanket that wrapped around them. A small fire burned in the center, the heart of the home. The air smelled of herbs, of wood smoke, of wool. Shia was there, her burned arm propped on a pillow of blankets, her face pale but her eyes as sharp as obsidian. She had been waiting. Without a word, she gestured with her good hand to a pot simmering near the coals. She looked at her brother, at his broken, bloody nose and the dark, fresh stain on his shoulder. She looked at Clara, whose hands were raw, whose face was a map of soot and exhaustion. "Sit," Shia commanded, and her voice was the law in this house. Clara, moving as if in a dream, went to the fire, drawn by the heat. Shia rose, wincing, and began to tend to her brother. She took clean cloths and a bowl of hot water steeped with herbs. She cleaned his face, gently, reset the bridge of his nose with a single, practiced movement that made Atsa hiss, but he did not pull away. She cut the ruined bandage from his shoulder, her lips tight with anger at the reopened wound, and began the slow, careful work of cleaning and redressing it. Clara watched, feeling useless, an intruder. Her own body ached, a deep, bone-weary pain. Shia, as if sensing her thoughts, finished with her brother, and then turned to Clara. She did not speak. She simply handed Clara a small, carved wooden bowl filled with blue corn mush, thick and steaming, with a small pat of goat butter melting in the center. Clara took it. Her hands were shaking. She had not eaten she could not remember. She lifted the spoon, and the simple, earthy taste of the corn, of the salt, of the warmth, was so profound, so grounding, that she had to close her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. It was a sacrament, a ritual of thanks, not to a distant god, but to the fire, to the corn, to the simple, stubborn fact of survival. Atsa ate, too, his movement slow, pained. When they were finished, the hogan was silent, save for the soft sigh of the fire, the world outside, the world of fire and greed, of harrow and rook, felt 1,000 miles away. Here, there was only the circular wall, the breathing fire, the smell of earth. "He will not stop," Clara said, her voice a dry rasp, breaking the silence. "We will go to the plaza tomorrow. We will show them the proof. But what if it is not enough? What if they just kill us?" She looked at Atsa, her fear a raw, open thing. "Harrow will bring more men, hired guns. He will burn this place, too, to get to you. He will hunt us all down." Atsa stared into the fire. He had been quiet, his face a mask of pain and thought, When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "He will not hunt us. He will hunt my people. I brought this to her door." He gestured to Shia, who was watching them, her dark eyes missing nothing. I have brought the wolf to my family's home. It is the long walk, again. One man's greed, and my people pay the price. Perhaps it is better if I go, if I take this fight to the mountains." "No," Clara said, her voice sharp. She moved from her spot, shuffling on her knees to sit closer to him. The warmth of the fire was on her face, but the warmth she sought was his. If you run, he wins. He wins the land. He wins the law. He wins the story. He will call you a coward and a murderer, and the world will believe him. She looked at him, at the dark, dried blood on his face, the deep lines of pain around his eyes, the strength in his unbroken shoulder. She saw the man from the cage, the man who had survived the walk, the man who had pulled her from the creek, the man who had run into a burning building for his sister. "You are strong," she whispered, her hand finding his fingers calloused and hard against her raw skin. He did not pull away. He looked at her, his eyes full of the shadows of his past, of the weight he was carrying. "Then take your time," she said, her voice thick, the words for him and for her. "Hold me slowly, so I'll never forget." It was a request. It was a plea. It was a statement. He had held her in the rain, an anchor. Now, she was asking for a different kind of anchor. He did not speak. He turned, shifting his wounded body. His good arm came around her, pulling her against his chest. She let out a breath she had been holding since Kansas, a ragged, broken sound, and she leaned into him. She rested her head against his solid, warm chest, her ear over his heart. She could hear it, a slow, steady, powerful beat. Life. His arm was a comfort, a fortress. Her own arms went around him, her hands spreading flat against his back, feeling the hard, lean muscle. They just held each other. Two exhausted, wounded people, in the center of a small, earthen home, surrounded by a world that wanted them dead. It was not a fire. It was a healing. His hand, the one that was not holding her, found her hand, his fingers laced with hers. A quiet, simple joining. This was not possession. It was a choice, a promise. Made in silence, before the battle. They were choosing each other. They stayed like that for a long, long time, the fire settling to red, glowing coals. A soft, frantic scratching at the door broke the spell. They sprang apart, the moment shattered. Atsa was on his feet, the pain forgotten, his hand on the knife at his belt. Shia was sitting up, her eyes on the door. "Who is it?" Atsa called, his voice a low growl. "It is me," a voice whispered, thin with panic. "Addie, please let me in." Atsa slid the heavy wooden bar. Addie tumbled in, soaked and gasping, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like a shield. Father O'Rourke was right behind her, his face grim, his cassock muddy to the knees. "We ran," Addie panted, her spectacles fogged. "They did not see us." "What is it?" Clara said, helping the girl to her feet. "What has happened?" "Harrow," Addie said, her voice shaking. "He is not sleeping. He held a meeting, at the hotel, with the mayor and Sheriff Pike, and new men." "New men?" Atsa asked, his voice sharp. "Not from here," Addie said, wringing her hands. They look like the men in the magazines. Gunslingers. They wear fine suits, but they have guns. I saw them. Harrow he was smiling." Father O'Rourke stepped forward, his face a thundercloud. "It is worse. It is a citizens' tribunal. That is what they are calling it. A public hearing, yes, but not the one we want. Harrow and the mayor have just now, not an hour ago, appointed a panel of 12 concerned citizens to hear the evidence in the morning. I saw the list. Every man on it works for the railroad
or owes his store to Harrow's bank.
A cold, sick silence filled the hogan.
A rigged jury, Clara whispered, the hope draining from her. A show trial. They will take our proof, and they will laugh, and then they will hang him.
They will destroy the evidence, Atsa said, his voice flat. And they will destroy us.
Clara's mind, which had gone soft and warm in his arms, was suddenly sharp. A cold, bright blade. She looked at the priest. The telegraph spool, she said. Father, you have it.
I do, he said, patting the pocket of his wet coat.
Then we cannot give it to them, she said. We cannot give the original to that kangaroo court.
What do we do? Addie asked, her voice small.
Clara looked at the door. The postmaster, Gantry, he is a coward, but he is a federal employee. He fears Washington more than he fears Harrow.
The plan formed, sharp and desperate, from the ashes of their hope.
Father, Clara said, taking command, you and Addie will go to the post office. Now, you will wake Gantry. You will give him the original telegraph spool. He will not want to take it. You will make him. Father, you will tell him it is evidence in a federal crime, interference with the mail, conspiracy by the railroad. You will use those words.
And then, the priest asked, his eyes catching her fire, you will make him send a verified copy by wire to the United States federal judge in Santa Fe immediately, and he will seal the original spool with the federal wax and send it on the morning mail pouch. That evidence will be gone from this town before sunrise. It will be safe.
My child, the priest said, a slow smile spreading on his face. That is inspired.
And tomorrow, Atsa asked. He was watching her, not as a woman he had held, but as a leader, as an equal.
Tomorrow, Clara said, her voice steady.
We will go to their tribunal, and we will present our case. We will use Addie's drawing of the wire. We will use the burned ledger. We will show them the brand. We will tell them, in front of the whole town, what they did.
They will destroy the copies,
Addie whispered.
They will arrest us.
Let them, Clara said, her voice iron. Let the whole town watch them destroy the truth. Let everyone see what they are. It does not matter, because the real proof, the real truth, will be safe. It will be on its way to Santa Fe. We are not just fighting for a verdict tomorrow. We are fighting for the record, for the truth. Father O'Rourke and Addie left, slipping back into the night, two small, determined shadows on a desperate errand. Shia, who had been listening, rose on her one good arm. She looked at Clara. You have, she said, her voice quiet, a strong heart. She went to a small wooden chest. She took something out. She walked to Clara and held it out. It was a chain, not of beads, but of intricately woven yucca fiber, dyed in the deep, rich colors of the earth. The pattern was stark, powerful, a dark, swirling shape. The storm, and from its very center, a single, bright green shoot, the sprout.
For strength,
Shia said, her voice soft.
To stand on new ground.
Clara's hands, raw and sore, reached out. She took the chain. It was rough and strong and beautiful. It was a gift of acceptance. Clara looked at Atsa, who stood by the fire, the light of the coals casting shadows on his healing, battered face. The fear was still there, but it was a cold, hard thing now, a fuel. It is a good plan, he said. Whatever happens tomorrow, she replied, her fingers closing around the woven chain. This is not the end. We will build that school. You will build your forge. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers over the dying fire. A promise. And we will build a law, he said, a real one, here. The sun rose over a town that felt like a fresh grave. The air was cold. sharp with the lingering, sour smell of wet ash. The plaza, yesterday a place of festival, was a field of mud and debris. The blackened skeleton of the warehouse stood as a stark, accusing silhouette against the pale morning sky. But the crowd had gathered. They were not here for a festival. They were here for a hanging, or perhaps a reckoning. They stood in a thick, somber semicircle, their faces pale and anxious. They were ranchers, shopkeepers, vaqueros, and dine weavers, all drawn by the terrible gravitational pull of what was to come. On the platform where the band had played, a long table was set. Behind it sat the 12 men Father O'Rourke had warned of. They were not a jury. They were an audience. They were shopkeepers who owed their mortgages to Harrow's bank, freight haulers who relied on railroad contracts, and men who simply looked hungry. Lucius Harrow sat to one side, dressed in a clean, dark suit, his face a mask of somber, civic concern. Beside him sat a new man, sharp-featured, with spectacles and a thin, merciless mouth. This was Carter, the lawyer from El Paso. Sheriff Pike stood near the steps, his face the color of old parchment. He looked as if he had not slept. He looked, Clara thought, like a man who had seen his own ghost. Clara, Atza, Father O'Rourke, Addie, and Miguel walked into the plaza. They walked together, a small, ragged island of defiance. The crowd parted for them, murmuring, their eyes a mix of fear, pity, and suspicion. Atza's face was swollen, his nose a dark bruised line. Shia's arm was in a clean sling. Clara wore the woven chain of the storm and the sprout, tucked just inside the collar of her gray dress. They stopped at the foot of the platform. "This is the Citizens' Tribunal," the mayor announced, his voice straining to sound official. "Called to address the crisis, the fire, and the accusations against Mr. Atza Yazzie." Carter, the lawyer, stood. He was smooth. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying, "this is a sad day, a day of violence. Last night, this town was attacked, an accusation was made, and then, to cover that accusation, a fire was set, a fire that destroyed the very evidence this body would have examined." He pointed to the burned ledger, which Father O'Rourke was holding. "They will show you a burned book. A book they themselves burned, to hide the truth of their own raid." "That is a lie," Addie cried out, her voice thin but clear. Carter smiled, a predator's smile. "We have a sworn witness. He will testify again." The witness was called, the same gaunt, terrified man. He repeated his lie, his eyes fixed on Cass Rook, who stood at the edge of the plaza, his arms crossed. A dozen of his own men, and 3 of Harrow's new, suited gunmen, fanned out behind him. Then, Clara stepped forward. She looked not at the jury, but at the crowd. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the cold air. "The lawyer is right. This is a sad day, because a lie has been given the seat of honor, while the truth is made to stand in the mud." "These are just words," Carter snapped. "Where is your proof?" "Our proof was burned," Clara said, "by the man who set the fire." She turned to Addie. "Addie, tell them what you saw." Addie, shaking, held up her sketchbook. She had redrawn it, larger, on clean paper, the sketch of Cass Rook, his face illuminated by the flame he had just set. "I saw him," Addie said, her voice growing stronger. "Mr. Rook, he shot the lantern. He set the fire." Carter laughed. "You saw a man, in the dark, in a panic, a child's drawing. It is not evidence. It is an accusation, worthless." "My testimony is not worthless," Miguel said, stepping forward, his good arm gesturing. "I saw the train. I saw the covered cars. I saw them shipped on a night when no train was scheduled. It was Rook. It was his men." A disgruntled vaquero. Carter dismissed him. Another ally of the accused. More words. "Then let us speak of things that are not words," Father O'Rourke said, his voice a low, booming rumble. He held up a new drawing from Addie. It was a perfect, neat transcription of the telegraph spool. "This," the priest said, "is the copy of the order. From Mr. Harrow, L.H. to the El Paso brokers, for 200 head of cattle." Carter was ready. A copy. A forgery drawn by the same child who draws cartoons of Mr. Rook. Where is this magical original? This was the moment. Clara's heart was a cold stone. "The original," Father O'Rourke said, his voice rising, "was seized by me as a concerned citizen, and at 5 o'clock this morning, it was handed to the United States Postmaster." A gasp from the crowd. Gantry, the postmaster, who was standing in the back, tried to shrink. Postmaster Gantry Sheriff Pike called, his voice rough. He had to clear his throat. "Is this true?" Gantry, his face slick with sweat, stepped forward. All eyes were on him. He looked at Harrow, who was staring at him, his face impassive. He looked at the priest, who was staring at him like the wrath of God. It is," Sheriff Gantry stammered, "federal law. It was evidence concerning the railroad, interference with the wire. I sent a copy by wire to the federal judge in Santa Fe. The original went out on the morning mail coach. It is gone." The silence was profound. Harrow's mask did not slip, but a small muscle in his jaw jumped. Carter, for the first time, looked wrong-footed. He had been prepared to destroy a piece of paper. He had not been prepared for it to be gone. A procedural trick. Carter recovered, his voice sharper. "It proves nothing. A desperate, illegal act by a rogue priest." "Was it illegal?" Clara asked, stepping forward again. She was holding the heavy, canvas-wrapped brand. She placed it on the table. "Is this illegal? This is the brand. The one they used. The liar's brand. Taken from their fire. In Chola Wash." Rook, who had been watching, took a half-step forward. His eyes narrowed. "And we have more," Clara said, her voice ringing. "The proof that could not be burned. The proof the rain could not wash away. The proof of the black tar spilled on the railroad tracks. From the barrel we pushed from the train." Rook flinched. It was a tiny movement, an involuntary clench of his fist. Carter saw it. He tried to cut her off. "Tar barrels. What is this more fantasy? She is delirious." "Am I?" Clara's gaze was locked on Rook. "A barrel of paint, perhaps for the bridges." Rook's face was dark with blood. He was not a man for courts. He was a man of action, and he was being unmade by a schoolteacher. "You," Rook snarled, forgetting himself, his voice a low growl. "You were in that boxcar. I saw you. That was paint. For the bridges, it was railroad property." He had said it. He had admitted it. The plaza went dead silent. Rook had just placed himself on the train. He had just admitted to the barrel. He had just contradicted his own witness. Sheriff Pike, his face as gray as ash, seemed to grow, to pull himself up from the shell he had become. He looked at Harrow. One long, final look of comprehension, of betrayal, of disgust. He looked at the jury of cronies. He looked at the crowd. He unhooked the leather thong from the hammer of his pistol. "Mr. Rook," Pike said, his voice a low, gravelly thing. "You just put yourself on that train. You just admitted to being in that car. You just perjured yourself. Cass Rook, you are under arrest. For perjury, for conspiracy, and for the fire last night." He took a step, and Lucius Harrow, his face no longer calm, gave a single, sharp nod. "The 3 new men, the ones in the suits, drew their pistols. They did not draw like frontiersmen, with a flourish. They drew like professionals, smooth and fast. The first shot was fired at Sheriff Pike. The world exploded. It was not a duel, it was a massacre. The new men fired into the platform, into the Allies. Miguel went down, clutching his leg. Father O'Rourke tackled Addie, pushing her to the ground. The crowd screamed, a single terrified animal, and scattered, running for cover.
Rook's men, seeing the signal, drew their guns, firing into the air, adding to the panic.
A small child, a girl of about 6, stood frozen in the center of the plaza, her mother having been knocked away. One of the gunmen, turning, saw her and leveled his pistol, perhaps to clear the way. Sheriff Pike, who had not yet been hit, saw it. He had no time to shoot. He ran, a heavy, desperate, clumsy run. He shoved the child, hard, pushing her out of the line of fire. The bullet that was meant for her took him in the back. Pike crumpled to the ground, his face hitting the mud. Rook, his face a mask of wild, triumphant rage, saw his chance. He raised his own pistol, not at the crowd, but at Clara, who was frozen, watching Pike fall. No, Atsa roared. He crossed the 10 feet between them in a single bound. He hit Rook, not with a fist, but with his entire body. A driving, silent tackle. The plaza was chaos. Men shouting, women screaming, the last of the crowd scrambling for cover. Clara, jarred from her shock, saw Harrow. He was not running. He was walking, calmly, surrounded by his 2 remaining gunmen, toward his hotel, escaping. She looked down. Pike's pistol, a heavy Colt, lay in the mud, inches from his outstretched hand. She did not think. She grabbed it. It was heavy, slick with mud. She ran, cutting Harrow off. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She raised the gun, both hands, trying to hold it steady. "Harrow, stop! Tell them to stop!" Harrow stopped. He looked at her. The widow, the school teacher. Her face was black with soot, her hair a wild tangle, her dress torn, and she was holding a gun, aimed at his heart. He saw the look in her eyes, the look of a woman who had already lost everything, the look of a woman who would, absolutely, pull the trigger. "Enough," Harrow said, his voice calm, raising his hands. "Gentlemen, stand down." The gunfire, which had become sporadic, stopped. On the other side of the plaza, the fight between Atsa and Rook was over. It had been brief, brutal, and silent. They had crashed through a vendor's stall. Rook had pulled his knife. Atsa, his shoulder searing, his nose a blaze of pain, had fought with a cold, clear precision. He had disarmed Rook, the knife skittering away. He was on top of him, his hands on Rook's throat. He could feel the man's pulse, the life. He could end it. He could kill the man who had set the fire, the man who had tried to hang him, the man who had hurt Shia. He saw the flash of his own rage, and in it, he saw the faces of the soldiers from the long walk. He would not be them. He drew back his fist and hit Rook once, a clean, hard blow to the jaw. The man went limp. The plaza was silent. The ringing in Clara's ears was the only sound. There was only the mud, the smoke, the dead, and the living. Atsa, breathing hard, found a length of rope from the broken stall. He bound Rook's hands, tightly. Clara held the gun on Harrow. Father O'Rourke was tending to Miguel's leg. Addie was at the side of the little girl, who was crying. Atsa dragged the unconscious Cass Rook through the mud, and he dropped him, like a sack of grain, at the feet of Sheriff Pike. Pike was not dead, not yet. He was on his side, his breath a wet, shallow thing. He had seen it. He had seen Atsa not kill him. He looked at the man he had caged. Atsa, his face a mask of blood and mud, stared back. It is the law," Pike whispered, a bloody foam on his lips. "It must be." His hand, shaking, went to his chest. He fumbled with the tin star. He ripped it free, his last act of strength. He pressed the small, muddy piece of metal into Atsa's hand. "You keep the peace," Pike gasped. "You are the law, now." His hand fell. His eyes, which had been fixed on Atsa's, went vacant, staring at the gray, indifferent sky. A sob escaped Clara's throat. Atsa looked at the badge in his hand. It was just a piece of tin, but it was heavy, heavy as a life, heavy as a town. He closed his fist around it. He stood up, and he walked, not to Clara, but to Lucius Harrow. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood in front of the most powerful man in the territory. His face a grim, resolute mask, the bloody badge hidden in his fist. Mr. Harrow, Atsa Yazi said, his voice quiet and final. You are detained. You will wait for the federal judge. And the crowd, which had begun to creep back, watched. They saw the Baron, his hands in the air. They saw the hired guns, their pistols lowered. They saw the bound form of Cass Rook, and they saw the dying blacksmith, standing in the mud, holding the town's peace in his hand. The town of San Isidro did not celebrate its victory. It mourned its birth. The cost had been high, written in ash and blood, and the first act of the new, uncertain peace was a burial. They buried Sheriff Pike on the low hill overlooking the plaza, not in the churchyard. It was a decision made by the town, unspoken, but unanimous. He had died in the plaza, for the plaza, and he would watch over it. It was not a grand affair. Father O'Rourke spoke, his words simple, about a man who had been lost, and in his final moments, had found himself. The most profound moment came after the priest had finished. Shia, her arm in a clean sling, stepped forward. She was followed by Miguel, who limped on a new cane. They were followed by Marchetta, and then by a dozen others, Anglo, Mexican, and Dinah. They came, not with flowers, but with stones, one by one. They placed a single, good stone from the riverbed on the grave, in the Navajo way of marking a place. They built a small, sturdy cairn, a monument not to a perfect man, but to a perfect act. Atsa was the last. He stood for a long moment, the muddy tin star still in his pocket. He placed his stone, a piece of dark, iron-rich rock, on the very top. The town, fractured and raw, had found its first moment of unity. They stood together under the vast, washed-clean sky, and they were, for the first time, a community. 2 days later, the mail coach brought the letter. Postmaster Gantry, looking like a man who had been absolved of a great sin, delivered it to Father O'Rourke, who read it aloud on the steps of the mission, where the entire town had gathered to listen. It was from the office of the United States Federal Judge in Santa Fe. The words were dry, legal, and beautiful. The original telegraph spool had been received, entered as official evidence. The copy sent by wire was confirmed. An immediate injunction was issued, freezing all assets of Lucius Harrow and the San Isidro Land and Rail Company, pending a full federal investigation. Federal marshals, the letter stated, would arrive within the week to take custody of Mr. Harrow, Mr. Rook, and the other gunmen, and to transport them to Santa Fe for trial. The victory was, at last, real. It was paper. It was law. Harrow, who had been under guard in the hotel, his new expensive gunmen disarmed and locked in the same cells they had helped build, heard the news. He said nothing. He simply poured himself a brandy, his hand, for the first time, shaking. The town began to breathe. The first breath was slow, painful, like that of a man with a broken rib, but it was a breath. The work of rebuilding began, not with timber and nails, but with heart. Atsa, his face healing, his shoulders stiff, went to the ruins of the feed store. He claimed the rubble. With Miguel and his cousins, he cleared the black, charred beams. He did not ask for money. He bartered, as his people had always done. He would mend. He would make. He built his forge. He used the stones from the ruined walls and adobe mud and his own hard-won strength. He built a new, bigger set of bellows. And when it was done, when the first clean, hopeful curl of smoke rose from its chimney, the town came. They brought broken plows, bent hinges, dull knives, and he fixed them. He heated the iron, and he hammered it. And with every strike, he was not just shaping metal, he was hammering out a new shape for the town, a shape of service, of use, of strength. On the day he opened, he walked to the wall by the door, and he hung the knife. The first good one he had made, the one he had given Clara. She had given it back to him in the quiet of Shia's hogan, her hands over his. "This is yours," she had said, "your work." Now, he hung it, not as a weapon, but as a promise, a memory of where they had been, and a sign of the work to come. Clara, too, began her work. She had no schoolhouse. The fund Harrow had donated was poison, and the town, in a quiet, unanimous vote, had returned it to the frozen assets. So she started her school under the shade of the one great cottonwood tree in the plaza, the one the fire had not touched. She had no books. They had burned with her meager belongings. She had no slate. She had a piece of charcoal from the forge and a wide, smooth plank of wood. Her first students were the children of the vaqueros, Miguel's nieces and nephews. Then, Addie brought her younger sister, and then, one morning, Shia came, leading 4 small, shy dine children who had never before set foot in the plaza without fear. Clara Whitfield, her voice still a little rough from the smoke, stood before them. She had 20 children, Anglo, Mexican, Navajo. They looked at her with wide, curious eyes. She was breaking a barrier as old as the dust. She taught them their letters, drawing in the dirt. She taught them their numbers, and she taught them their story, using Addie's sketches as their textbook. But nature, which had been their ally with the rain, became their new adversary. The rain stopped. The sun, which had been a comfort, became a tyrant, a drought, the kind that was a curse on this land. Settled, the air was dry. The mud of the plaza turned to cracked, hard stone. The creek began to slow, the water a thin, sluggish trickle. The corn in the small fields wilted. The town, which had survived fire, now faced thirst. It was Atza who solved it. He was not a farmer. He was a man of the earth. He walked, not the creek bed, but the hills above it, his eyes on the ground, on the way the plants grew, on the lay of the rock. He found it, a place where the land held a secret, a hidden, underground vein of water, pushing near the surface. He gathered Miguel, and the ranchers, and the men from the town. He showed them, and for a week they dug, not with anger, but with a shared purpose. They dug a ditch, a mile long, from the high ground, guiding the water down, using Atza's eye and their own sweat. Clara and the women, Marchetta, Shia, Addie, brought them water and food. The children watched and learned a lesson not found in any book. They were learning how a community worked. When they breached the last wall of dirt, the water came, a clean, cold, beautiful rush. It filled the ditch, and it ran down to the fields. A cheer, a real one, went up from the men. It was the first true sound of joy the town had made. That evening, Clara walked, alone, to the great cottonwood tree. The sound of the new water was a soft murmur in the dusk. She stood under its branches, and she took a small, cloth-wrapped object from her pocket. She had gone to Pike's office, to the desk where she had left her bond, and she had found it, in the dust, overlooked, her ring, Robert's ring. She had held it for a week, a cold, gold circle of her past. She looked at it, the symbol of a life that was gone, of a man she had loved, of a grief that had defined her. She knelt in the soft, damp earth at the base of the great tree, not where the new water ran, but in the old, solid ground. With her hands, she dug a small hole. She kissed the ring, a gesture of goodbye, and she placed it in the earth. She covered it. She was not burying Robert. She was planting him, letting him go. She was placing her past in the ground, so that she could, at last, stand on new ground. The town was healing. Addie, her sketches from the fire and the trial now famous, sat in the plaza, painting. It was a real painting, with oils, a gift from a traveling merchant. She was painting the plaza, not as it had been, full of ash, but as it was now. The forge, with its clean smoke, the children under the tree, the new, bright green of the corn in the fields. She called it the plaza after the rain. Shia, her arm healing, had gone back to her loom. She worked for weeks, her fingers flying. When she was done, she brought the gift to Clara's outdoor school. It was a blanket, a Hogan blanket, woven with the pattern of the storm, the dark, swirling clouds, and in the very center, the bright, defiant, green sprout, reaching for the light. It was the town story. It was Clara's story. They hung it from the branch of the cottonwood, a flag for their new, small nation. The federal marshals came, as promised. They were quiet, professional men who saw the new, unified town and were impressed. They took Harrow, his face a mask of cold fury, and Rook, who was sullen and silent, and the other gunmen. They left on the eastbound train. Justice would be done. The town council met. Their first act was to hold an election. Atza was nominated for sheriff. He refused. He shook his head, his hand on the star in his pocket, which he had not worn. "I am a blacksmith," he said, his voice quiet. "I am not the law. The law is all of us." They elected Miguel instead. He was a fair man, a man of the town, and he had a leg that would always remember the cost of the fight. And their second act, driven by Clara, was to pass a new town ordinance, not about cattle or land or guns. It was an ordinance, written in English and Spanish, and nailed to the post office wall. That made it a crime to use slander based on race or creed, to deny a man a trial or a seat at the table. It was a small thing, a piece of paper, but it was a start. That night, Clara was at her school, tidying the small space, folding the blanket. The air was cool, sweet with the smell of the damp earth. Atza came. He did not make a sound, but she knew he was there. He was just standing by the forge, watching her. She walked over to him. The forge was quiet. The coals banked. He had been working. She could tell. "The children are learning," she said, her voice soft. "They are," he said. "You are a good teacher, and you are a good blacksmith," she smiled. They stood in the comfortable silence that had grown between them. It was a language all its own. "I made a thing," he said, after a long time. He seemed, for the first time, nervous. His hand went into his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a ring. It was not a ring of gold. It was a ring of 3 metals, twisted together, like a small, perfect rope. Dark, strong iron from his forge. Bright, shining silver from his people, and the warm, red glow of copper. Iron for strength, silver for spirit, copper for the land, the color of the earth. He did not kneel. He did not ask her to be his wife. He simply held the ring out, in his calloused, scarred palm. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. I would like to walk with you for all the days." Clara looked at the ring. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She looked at his face, in the dim red glow of the forge. She saw the man from the cage, the man from the storm, the man from the fire. She did not cry. She smiled, a real warm, slow smile. She did not hold out her hand for him to put the ring on. She simply reached out and took his hand, the one that held the ring, and held it, in both of hers. "We already are, Atza," she whispered. "We already are." The telegraph, which had once been a tool of fear, became a herald of justice. The news came from Santa Fe 3 months after the trial, clicking across the wires, translated by a visibly relieved Mr. Gantry. Lucius Harrow had been convicted. The weight of the federal government, combined with the irrefutable evidence of the telegraph spool, the burned ledger, and the testimony of the town, had crushed his defense. He was found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and incitement to violence. His empire of paper and steel was dissolved. Cass Rook, convicted of arson and the murder of Sheriff Pike, was sentenced to life at hard labor. The reign of the railroad baron was over. The town did not celebrate with bonfires. They had seen enough fire. They marked the day with a quiet, profound nod. They had won. And now, the work could truly begin. The railroad did not vanish. It was a line of iron, and it was still a fact. But the new management, sent from the east to clean up the mess, was a different kind. They were men of ledgers, not of rifles. They held public meetings. They spoke of compensation. They paid, fairly, for the land they used. The railroad, once a predator, became what it had promised to be a tool. Clara's schoolhouse was the first new, permanent building erected in the rebuilt plaza. It was not built with Harrow's blood money. It was built by the men of the town, with adobe bricks made by Miguel's cousins and lumber donated by a merchant from Santa Fe who had heard their story. It was a fine, solid building, with real glass windows and a proper wooden floor. It served as the school, but it was also the town hall, the library, and the secretary's office. Clara, with her neat, steady handwriting, was elected unanimously as the town secretary. She recorded the minutes of the town council, where Sheriff Miguel Ortega now presided. She managed the small but growing collection of books. She was the town's memory, its teacher, and its scribe. Atza's forge was the town's heart. He was the blacksmith, and his work was the steady, rhythmic pulse of the new community. He mended the tools of farmers. He shod the horses of travelers. He forged, with his own hands, the new hinges for the church, and the iron gate for the small, new cemetery. One morning, he and Miguel went to the town square. The iron cage, the one that had held him, still sat there, a rusting monument to the old fear. It was an ugly, hateful thing. They attached a team of mules, and with the whole town watching, they dragged it, scraping and screaming in the dust, to his forge. He lit the fire, the hottest one he had ever built. He did not melt the cage. He cut it, with chisels and main strength, bar by painful bar. He laid the pieces in the fire, the iron that had been forged in prejudice, and he heated them until they glowed a sun-bright white. And he remade them. His hammer rang, a sound that echoed from the mesas. It was not the sound of a prisoner or a victim. It was the sound of a creator. He did not make weapons. He made plowshares. He hammered the bars of the cage into the curved, strong, clean edges that could break the earth. He forged 12 of them. He gave the first to Shia, for the Dine cornfields. He gave the second to Miguel's cousin, for his bean patch. The rest he gave, freely, to the Anglos, the Mexicans, the families that were putting down roots. He had taken the symbol of their confinement and turned it into the tool of their sustenance. His greatest work came from Father O'Rourke. The mission, rebuilt, needed a voice. The old bell had cracked. Atza took the commission. He worked for a month, building a new mold. He used his 3 metals. He used the town's iron. For strength. He used the silver from his people. Traded fairly. For spirit. And he used the copper, red as the earth. He cast the bell, and when it was cooled and polished, it was a thing of beauty. They hung it in the new bell tower. When Atza pulled the rope for the first time, the sound that rang out over San Isidro was not the harsh clang of the railroad. It was a sound that was deep and clear and true. It was the sound of their home. The new community was not without its conflicts. The drought had broken, but water was still the land's most precious coin. The new ranchers and the Dine shepherds needed the same creeks. The new council met. Miguel, in his sheriff's chair, presided. But this was not a meeting of lawyers. It was a meeting of neighbors. Shia came, representing the weavers and herders. They met at the table in Clara's schoolhouse, the storm sprout blanket, Shia's gift, hung on the wall behind them. They did not argue law. They drew a map. They talked of the seasons, of the herds, of the needs of the children. They established boundaries, not of property, but of respect. They wrote down the rules for sharing the water, for the rights of way for the cattle. It was a small, simple document. It was a treaty, made not between nations, but between people. When it was done, they all signed it, and Clara sealed it with the town's new official stamp, a circle, enclosing a sprout and a hammer. The seasons turned. The town grew. The scars on the plaza faded, replaced by new grass. One warm afternoon, Clara stood in her schoolhouse. The room was full of children, their faces bright and clean. Anglo, Mexican, Dine, all sitting together. The storm sprout blanket was on the wall, and beside it, Addie's painting. The plaza after the rain, a vibrant work of green and blue. Clara was not teaching from a textbook. She was holding up a copy of the Santa Fe Gazette, which had arrived on the morning train. An article was circled in red. It was a follow-up story on the trial. Not about the crime, but about the town. It was titled, "The Courage of San Isidro." "We will read this," Clara said, her voice warm. "Together, Maria, will you start?" A small, dark-haired girl stood, and in a clear, halting voice, she began to read the story of their own courage. The door of the schoolhouse opened. Atsa stood there. He was clean, his work done for the day. He wore the simple cotton shirt, and the 3-metal ring was a quiet band on Clara's hand as she pointed to the words. He did not interrupt. He leaned against the doorframe, a man at peace in his own home, and he listened to his town's children read their own history. When the reading was done, Clara smiled at him. "Mr. Yazzie," she said, a small, teasing light in her eyes. "You are just in time. The children have read the book of the town. Do you have a lesson for them?" He stood up straight, a slow, warm smile touching his lips. He nodded. "I do," he said. He walked not to the front, but to the door, and he opened it wide. "The lesson," he said, his voice quiet, "is outside." He led them out, not to the forge, but to the edge of the plaza, where the land met the wild. He pointed, not to the ground, but to the sky. "You have read the words," he said. "Now you must read the world. The book of the wind, the book of the hawk." He pointed to a single, high cloud, its edges catching the late afternoon sun. "That cloud," he said, "tells you the wind is changing. That hawk, circling, tells you there is water or life nearby. The stars, they are the map. You must learn to read the signs." He was teaching them his own language, the language of the earth, the language of survival, the language of home. Clara stood beside him, her hand finding his, and they watched together as their children looked to the sky. That evening, the plaza was quiet. The sound of Atsa's bell, a soft bronze call, rolled across the valley, calling the families to supper. The day's work was done. Clara and Atsa stood on the small porch of the forge, which was now their home. The sun was settling, a great, bloody fire behind the western mesas. It painted the sky in shades of violet and orange and deep, quiet rose. The air was cool and sweet with the smell of juniper. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. His arm, strong and solid, came around her, pulling her close. The wounds were long healed, but the scars remained, a map of where they had been. "It is a good sound," she whispered, as the last note of the bell faded. "It is a good town." He nodded, his cheek brushing her hair. "We built it," he said. They stood in silence, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear, watching the first stars appear, the ones he had taught the children to name. He looked at her, at her face, which was no longer the pale, haunted mask he had seen in the plaza, but a face of strength, of peace, of love. "Take it slow," he whispered, his voice low. "For her alone, a memory and a promise, so the West remembers our names." He turned her to him, and he kissed her. It was not the kiss of the storm, or the fire. It was a kiss of the homecoming, of the hearth, of the long, peaceful night. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from in the world. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what this story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe to Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give that hype button a press. It helps us bring more of these stories to life for everyone.